The middle of the 17th century marked a pivotal transformation in the balance of maritime power across the Atlantic world. Spain's once invincible naval supremacy, which had dominated the seas for over a century, began showing cracks that would eventually become gaping wounds in the empire's ability to protect its vast colonial trade networks. The Treaty of the Pyrenees, signed between Spain and France on November 7, 1659, represented more than just the end of the Franco-Spanish War. It signalled the beginning of Spain's gradual retreat from its position as Europe's preeminent naval force. Under the terms negotiated on the Isle of Pheasants in the Bidassoa River, Spain ceded significant territories to France, including Roussillon, Conflans, and parts of Flanders. More critically for the future of Caribbean piracy, the treaty forced Spain to acknowledge its diminished capacity to maintain exclusive control over the Americas. The financial drain of prolonged European conflicts had severely weakened the Spanish treasury, leaving fewer resources available for maintaining the extensive naval patrols necessary to protect the treasure fleets and merchant vessels that carried the wealth of the New World back to Europe. Spanish galleons, once the terror of any vessel that dared challenge their passage, now sailed with reduced escorts and increasingly outdated armaments. The famous plate fleets that had transported Peruvian silver and Mexican gold for generations found themselves vulnerable to attack as never before. Naval commanders in Havana and Cartagena reported to Madrid that they lacked sufficient warships to patrol the countless quays, inlets, and channels where hostile vessels could lie in wait. The Spanish colonial administration's requests for additional naval support went largely unanswered, as the Crown struggled with debts accumulated from decades of European warfare. This weakness in Spanish maritime defence created an opportunity that rival European powers were quick to exploit. The Caribbean, previously dominated by Spanish colonial settlements and trade routes, suddenly became a theatre where English, French, and Dutch interests could challenge Iberian supremacy with impunity. The transformation was most dramatically visible in the rise of buccaneering, a form of state-sanctioned piracy that would lay the groundwork for the golden age of piracy that followed. Tortuga, a small island off the northwest coast of Hispaniola, emerged as the first major buccaneer stronghold during this period. Originally settled by French colonists who had been driven from neighbouring Saint-Domingue by Spanish forces, Tortuga's rocky coastline and natural harbours provided ideal refuge for vessels seeking to avoid Spanish patrols. The island's governors, appointed by the French West India Company, actively encouraged attacks on Spanish shipping by issuing letters of marque to anyone willing to harass Spanish colonial interests. The buccaneers who gathered on Tortuga represented a diverse collection of nationalities and backgrounds. French hunters who had previously lived on Hispaniola, killing wild cattle and pigs for their hides, formed the core of many early buccaneer crews. These men, known as boucaniers for their method of smoking meat on wooden frames called boucans, possessed intimate knowledge of Caribbean waters and Spanish colonial settlements. English sailors, many of whom had served in Cromwell's navy during the Commonwealth period, brought naval expertise and familiarity with ship-to-ship combat. Dutch merchants contributed knowledge of trade routes and markets for captured goods. The buccaneer community on Tortuga operated under a loose confederation of captains who elected their own leaders and divided profits according to established articles. These early pirate codes, which would later influence the democratic practices of Golden Age piracy, established principles of shared risk and reward that attracted men dissatisfied with the rigid hierarchies of European naval and merchant service. A successful raid might net an ordinary buccaneer more money than he could earn in years of legitimate employment, creating a powerful incentive for continued participation in these quasi-legal ventures. Jamaica's transformation from Spanish colony to English stronghold in 1655 provided buccaneers with an even more significant base of operations. When Admiral William Penn and General Robert Venables captured the island for England during the Western Design Campaign, they inherited a strategic position that commanded the Windward Passage, one of the most important shipping lanes in the Caribbean. The English colonial government, recognising the value of buccaneers in defending the island against Spanish counterattacks, actively recruited pirates and privateers to Port Royal. Port Royal's natural harbour could accommodate vessels of any size, while its position at the mouth of Kingston Harbour provided easy access to both the open Caribbean and the protected waters of the harbour itself. The town that grew up around this strategic anchorage quickly developed a reputation for lawlessness and excess that would earn it the sobriquet the wickedest city on earth. Taverns, brothels and gaming houses lined the narrow streets, catering to buccaneers who arrived with Spanish gold burning holes in their pockets. The economic incentives that drove men to buccaneering and piracy during this period reflected broader social and economic disruptions throughout the Atlantic world. The end of major European conflicts left thousands of experienced sailors unemployed, their skills suddenly worthless in peacetime economies that had little use for men trained in naval warfare. The English Civil War and its aftermath had displaced numerous seamen who found themselves without prospects for legitimate employment. Similarly, the conclusion of various continental wars left French and Dutch sailors seeking alternative means of survival. Conditions aboard legitimate merchant vessels provided additional motivation for men to turn to piracy. Merchant captains, operating under intense pressure to maximise profits, often treated their crews with brutal severity. Sailors endured inadequate food, cramped quarters, and harsh discipline while receiving wages that barely covered their most basic needs. Naval service offered little improvement, with press gangs forcibly recruiting men into service where flogging, keel hauling and other savage punishments awaited those who challenged authority. The rigid class structure of European society offered few opportunities for advancement to men of humble birth. A common sailor might spend decades at sea without ever rising above his station, regardless of his skill or courage. Piracy, by contrast, operated on more egalitarian principles where ability and daring could elevate a man from the lowest position to command of his own vessel. The democratic election of pirate captains and the equitable distribution of booty according to predetermined shares created a social mobility that was virtually impossible to achieve through legitimate means. Religious and political persecution also contributed to the ranks of Caribbean buccaneers. French Huguenots, fleeing Catholic persecution following the revocation of the Edict of Nantes, found refuge among the buccaneers of Tortuga and Jamaica. English Republicans, unwelcome in Restoration England, similarly sought new opportunities in the lawless Caribbean. These men brought education, administrative skills, and connections that proved valuable in organising and financing piratical enterprises. The transformation of Port Royal into a major pirate haven proceeded rapidly under English colonial administration. Governor Thomas Modiford, appointed in 1664, actively encouraged buccaneering activities as a means of defending Jamaica against Spanish attack, while simultaneously enriching the colonial treasury through taxation of pirate profits. The governor issued commissions to buccaneer captains, providing them with legal cover for their attacks on Spanish shipping, while ensuring that a portion of their profits flowed into colonial coffers. Port Royal's merchants quickly recognised the economic opportunities presented by the buccaneer trade. Ships arriving with captured Spanish goods needed to sell their prizes quickly, often at below market prices, creating opportunities for substantial profits. Jewish merchants, many of whom had fled Spanish persecution in other Caribbean colonies, established trading houses that specialised in disposing of pirated goods. These merchants provided essential services to the buccaneers, converting stolen cargo into usable currency and supplies, while taking substantial commissions for their services. The physical transformation of Port Royal reflected its growing importance as a pirate haven. Warehouses expanded to accommodate increasing volumes of captured goods. Shipyards developed the capacity to repair and modify vessels damaged in combat, or requiring alterations for piratical purposes. Gunsmiths, carpenters, sailmakers, and other craftsmen established shops catering to the specialized needs of pirate crews. The town's population swelled with adventurers, merchants, craftsmen, and camp followers drawn by the promise of easy money. Social life in Port Royal during this period reflected the unique culture that emerged from the mixing of different nationalities, classes, and backgrounds. Taverns served as informal headquarters where captains recruited crew members and planned expeditions. The most successful pirates lived in considerable luxury, building elaborate houses and maintaining staffs of servants. Henry Morgan, perhaps the most famous of the buccaneers, constructed a mansion that rivaled those of legitimate colonial governors, complete with formal gardens and imported furnishings. The religious atmosphere in Port Royal was notably tolerant by 17th century standards. Anglican, Catholic, Jewish, and various Protestant denominations coexisted with minimal friction, united by their common interest in the profits of piracy. This religious diversity reflected the international character of the buccaneer community and the practical necessity of cooperation among men of different faiths engaged in dangerous enterprises. Women played significant roles in Port Royal's pirate economy, though their activities were often marginalised in contemporary accounts. Tavern keepers, merchants, and brothel operators accumulated substantial wealth by catering to the needs of visiting buccaneers. Some women invested in piratical ventures, providing financial backing for expeditions in exchange for shares of the profits. Others served as intelligence gatherers, using their connections with sailors and merchants to obtain information about Spanish shipping schedules and cargo manifests. The development of other pirate-friendly settlements throughout the Caribbean followed patterns similar to those established at Tortuga and Port Royal. Nassau in the Bahamas, though not yet the major pirate stronghold it would later become, already attracted vessels seeking refuge from Spanish patrols. The town's shallow harbour excluded large warships, while providing adequate anchorage for the smaller, more manoeuvrable vessels favoured by pirates. Local officials, poorly paid and irregularly supplied by distant colonial governments, often proved willing to overlook piratical activities in exchange for appropriate compensation. Madagascar, though distant from the Caribbean, began attracting pirates during this period as well. The island's location along the Indian Ocean trade routes made it an ideal base for attacking the treasure ships that carried Asian goods to Europe. The absence of effective European colonial control over much of Madagascar's coastline allowed pirates to establish settlements with minimal interference from legitimate authorities. These early Madagascar pirate communities would later play crucial roles in the golden age of piracy, providing bases for some of the era's most successful pirate captains. The economic impact of buccaneering extended far beyond the immediate profits gained from captured Spanish vessels. The influx of Spanish silver and gold into English and French colonial economies stimulated trade and development throughout the Caribbean. Merchants in London, Bristol, and other European ports invested in ventures designed to exploit the opportunities created by weakened Spanish control over Caribbean trade routes. Insurance rates for Spanish shipping increased dramatically, reflecting the growing risks faced by vessels operating in pirate-infested waters. Spanish colonial administrators struggled to respond effectively to the growing threat posed by buccaneers and pirates. Limited naval resources forced them to concentrate their defences around the most important ports and treasure routes, leaving smaller settlements and individual merchant vessels vulnerable to attack. Attempts to negotiate with English and French colonial governments for suppression of piratical activity is met with limited success, as these governments recognise the strategic and economic value of maintaining pressure on Spanish colonial interests. The legal framework surrounding piracy during this period remained complex and often contradictory. Letters of marque and reprisal, issued by colonial governors and European monarchs, provided legal justification for attacks on enemy shipping during times of war. However, the distinction between legitimate privateering and outright piracy often blurred in practice, particularly when hostilities between European powers ended, but colonial conflicts continued. Pirates learned to exploit these legal ambiguities, claiming authorization from distant governments or operating under expired commissions when challenged by authorities. As the 17th century progressed, the foundations laid during these early decades of maritime lawlessness would support an unprecedented expansion of piratical activity. The networks of suppliers, buyers, and safe harbours established by the buccaneers provided the infrastructure necessary for larger and more ambitious piratical enterprises. The social customs and organisational principles developed in places like Tortuga and Port Royal would influence pirate communities throughout the Atlantic world. The decade of the 1690s witnessed a fundamental transformation in the nature of Caribbean piracy, as the organised buccaneering communities that had flourished under colonial patronage began fragmenting into independent enterprises operating beyond the reach of any legitimate authority. This evolution accelerated dramatically following the Treaty of Ryswick, signed on September 20th, 1697, which brought an end to the War of the League of Augsburg and fundamentally altered the legal landscape that had previously sheltered privateering activities throughout the Caribbean. Under the terms negotiated at Ryswick, England, France, Spain, and the Dutch Republic agreed to mutual recognition of territorial claims in the Americas and established protocols for peaceful resolution of colonial disputes. More significantly for the future of piracy, the treaty required all signatory powers to revoke existing letters of marque and cease issuing new privateering commissions against former enemies. Colonial governors who'd previously encouraged attacks on Spanish shipping suddenly found themselves obligated to suppress the very activities they had actively promoted for decades. Governor William Beeston of Jamaica faced an immediate crisis when news of the treaty reached Port Royal in late 1697. Hundreds of privateers who had operated under English commissions against French and Spanish targets suddenly found their legal protection withdrawn. These men, many of whom had spent years perfecting the arts of naval warfare and ship capture, possessed few marketable skills applicable to legitimate employment. The colonial economy, which had become heavily dependent on the influx of captured goods and Spanish silver, faced severe disruption as this source of wealth disappeared overnight. The transition from sanctioned privateering to outright piracy proceeded gradually rather than through any dramatic transformation. Many former privateers initially attempted to obtain new commissions from other European powers still engaged in colonial conflicts. French governors in Martinique and Guadeloupe proved willing to issue letters of marque to English sailors willing to attack Spanish shipping, while Spanish colonial administrators occasionally recruited former English privateers for operations against French settlements. However, these arrangements provided only temporary solutions as European powers gradually moved toward more comprehensive peace agreements. The most successful pirates of this transitional period recognized that independence from colonial patronage offered greater long-term prospects than continued reliance on the shifting allegiances of European diplomacy. These men began developing new organizational structures and operational methods that would characterize the golden age of piracy. Rather than operating as extensions of colonial military forces, they established autonomous communities governed by democratic principles and bound together by formal agreements that distributed both risks and rewards equitably among participants. Henry Every emerged as the most significant figure of this transitional period, demonstrating through his spectacular success that independent piracy could yield profits far exceeding anything achieved under colonial sponsorship. Every, whose real name may have been Henry Avery or Benjamin Bridgman, began his piratical career as first mate aboard the privateer Charles II, operating under Spanish commission against French shipping in the Caribbean. In May 1694, Every led a mutiny against the ship's captain while anchored at Corunna, seizing control of the vessel and sailing for the Indian Ocean with a crew of approximately 85 men. Every's decision to abandon the Caribbean for the Indian Ocean reflected a sophisticated understanding of global trade patterns and the relative weakness of European naval forces in different regions. While the Caribbean had become increasingly patrolled by English, French, and Spanish warships, the Indian Ocean remained largely undefended beyond the immediate vicinity of major European trading posts. The annual pilgrim fleet that carried Muslim pilgrims from India to Mecca, along with the treasure ships of the Mughal Empire, presented targets far richer than anything available in Caribbean waters. The capture of the Ganges Sawai on September 7, 1695, near the entrance to the Red Sea, represented the most lucrative pirate raid in recorded history up to that point. The massive Mughal treasure ship, owned by the Grand Mughal Aurangzeb himself, and carrying an estimated 600,000 rupees in gold and silver, along with precious stones and other valuables, fell to Evry's flotilla after a fierce battle lasting several hours. Contemporary accounts describe the Ganges Sawai as a floating palace, measuring over 1,600 tons with 80 guns and a crew of 400 armed men, making its capture a remarkable feat of seamanship and tactical skill. Evry's men reportedly found the ship's strongroom filled with chests of gold mohurs, silver rupees, and precious stones, including diamonds, rubies, and emeralds. The personal belongings of wealthy pilgrims yielded additional treasures in the form of jewellery, silk cloth, and exotic spices. Each member of Evry's crew received a share worth approximately £1,000, equivalent to 20 years' wages for an ordinary seaman. Evry himself claimed a captain's portion worth an estimated £2,000 to £3,000, making him one of the wealthiest men in the Atlantic world. News of Evry's success spread rapidly throughout the Caribbean and American colonies, carried by merchant vessels and transmitted through the informal networks that connected pirate communities across the Atlantic. The story grew with each telling, transforming Evry from a successful pirate captain into a legendary figure whose exploits inspired countless sailors to abandon legitimate employment for the promise of similar riches. Recruiting for piratical expeditions became significantly easier as tavern keepers in Port Royal, Nassau, and other pirate havens recounted tales of Evry's golden capture. The impact of Evry's success extended far beyond its effect on pirate recruitment. The attack on the Ganges Sawai provoked a diplomatic crisis between the English East India Company and the Mughal Empire that threatened to disrupt the lucrative Asian trade, upon which English merchants increasingly depended. Emperor Aurangzeb, outraged by the attack on his personal vessel and the reported mistreatment of Muslim pilgrims by Evry's crew, threatened to expel all English traders from Mughal territories and seize East India Company assets in retaliation. English colonial and metropolitan authorities found themselves forced to take unprecedented action against piracy to preserve vital commercial relationships. The East India Company, facing potential losses worth millions of pounds, pressured the English government to issue the first substantial bounty for the capture of a pirate leader. A reward of £500 was offered for Evry's capture, along with a royal pardon for any of his crew members who surrendered voluntarily. This marked the beginning of a more aggressive governmental response to piracy that would intensify throughout the following decade. The manhunt for Evry and his associates revealed the extent to which pirate networks had penetrated colonial society. Several crew members were captured in American ports, where they had attempted to dispose of their shares of the treasure through established merchant connections. The trials of these men provided detailed testimony about the organisation and methods of Evry's expedition, offering colonial authorities their first comprehensive intelligence about the operational capabilities of independent pirate crews. Evry himself successfully evaded capture, disappearing from historical records after reportedly settling an island under an assumed identity. His successful escape enhanced his legendary status among potential pirates, demonstrating that even the most wanted criminals could evade the reach of imperial authority if they possessed sufficient cunning and resources. The failure to apprehend Evry, despite extensive efforts by English authorities, highlighted the limitations of colonial law enforcement and encouraged other pirates to believe they could operate with relative impunity. The success of Evry's expedition coincided with significant developments in pirate organisation and governance that would characterise the golden age of piracy. The democratic principles that had emerged among the buccaneers of Tortuga and Jamaica evolved into more sophisticated systems of shipboard governance, based on formal articles of agreement that established rights and responsibilities for all crew members. These pirate codes, as they became known, represented remarkable experiments in democratic organisation that preceded similar developments in legitimate maritime industries by several decades. The articles typically began with provisions establishing the authority of the captain during combat and navigation, while limiting his power in other circumstances to decisions approved by majority vote of the crew. This balance between necessary hierarchy during dangerous operations and democratic decision-making in routine matters reflected the practical experience of men who understood both the requirements of effective naval command and the importance of maintaining crew loyalty through equitable treatment. Profit-sharing arrangements formed the core of most pirate articles, establishing predetermined formulas for distributing captured wealth among crew members according to their rank and responsibilities. A typical agreement might allocate 2 shares to the captain, 1.5 shares to the quartermaster, 1.25 shares to experienced seamen, and single shares to ordinary crew members. Additional compensation was provided for men who suffered injuries during combat, with specific amounts designated for the loss of limbs, eyes, or other permanent disabilities. The position of quartermaster emerged as a crucial check on captain's authority, with these officers elected by the crew to represent their interests in disputes and oversee the fair distribution of provisions and captured goods. Quartermasters typically commanded during boarding actions and maintained discipline among the crew, serving as intermediaries between the democratic will of the pirates and the practical requirements of ship operation. The most successful pirate crews developed sophisticated systems of checks and balances that prevented the concentration of excessive power in any single individual, while maintaining the unity necessary for effective operations. Disciplinary provisions in pirate articles reflected the unique challenges of maintaining order among men who had often turned to piracy precisely to escape the harsh discipline of legitimate naval service. Rather than relying on the brutal punishments common aboard merchant vessels and warships, pirate codes typically emphasized economic penalties and social ostracism as means of controlling unacceptable behavior. Theft from fellow crew members, cowardice in battle, or desertion during expeditions might result in marooning on uninhabited islands or forfeiture of shares in captured prizes. The development of these democratic governance systems attracted men who valued personal freedom and equitable treatment above the security offered by legitimate employment. Former naval officers who had grown disgusted with the arbitrary authority exercised by their superiors found pirate crews offered opportunities to practice more enlightened forms of leadership. Educated men who faced limited advancement prospects in class-conscious European society discovered that pirate communities valued ability and initiative regardless of social background. Madagascar's emergence as a major pirate stronghold during this period reflected both the global expansion of piratical activities and the strategic advantages offered by the island's geography and political situation. Located approximately 250 miles off the east coast of Africa, Madagascar commanded the sea routes connecting Europe with Asia, while remaining largely beyond the reach of European colonial authorities. The island's native kingdoms engaged in complex political relationships with each other, and occasional conflicts with European traders proved willing to accommodate pirate settlements in exchange for manufactured goods and military assistance. The northeastern coast of Madagascar, particularly the area around Île Sainte-Marie, offered numerous advantages for pirate operations. The island's natural harbours could accommodate vessels of any size, while providing protection from both storms and hostile warships. Dense tropical forests supplied timber for ship repairs and construction, while abundant freshwater streams and fertile soil supported permanent settlements. The absence of European military forces meant that pirates could establish bases without fear of sudden attack by colonial authorities. Adam Baldridge, an English pirate who established a settlement on Ile Sainte-Marie around 1691, demonstrated the potential for creating permanent pirate communities that could support extended operations in the Indian Ocean. Baldridge's settlement included warehouses for storing captured goods, workshops for ship maintenance, and residential quarters for pirates and their families. The community maintained diplomatic relations with local Malagasy rulers, while serving as a supply depot and communications hub for pirate crews operating throughout the Indian Ocean. The strategic value of Madagascar as a pirate base became increasingly apparent as more crews followed Every's example in seeking their fortunes in Asian waters. The annual monsoon patterns that governed Indian Ocean navigation made Madagascar an ideal location for pirates to wait out unfavourable sailing conditions while planning their next expeditions. Ships could arrive at Madagascar after completing raids in the Red Sea or along the Indian coast, dispose of their captured goods through Baldridge's trading network, and spend the off-season preparing for future operations. The establishment of Madagascar as a pirate stronghold created new opportunities for ambitious captains willing to undertake the long voyage from Caribbean bases. Thomas Chew, operating from Newport, Rhode Island, completed a successful round-trip voyage to Madagascar in 1692 to 1693, capturing a Mughal treasure ship and returning to America with profits that inspired numerous imitators. Chew's success demonstrated that American-based pirates could profitably operate in the Indian Ocean, while maintaining connections to colonial markets for disposing of captured goods. The growing importance of Madagascar in pirate operations coincided with increasing pressure on traditional Caribbean bases as colonial authorities began implementing the anti-piracy provisions of the Treaty of Ryswick. Governor Beeston's efforts to suppress piracy in Jamaica met with limited success due to the deep economic relationships that had developed between pirates and legitimate merchants, but the legal environment became increasingly hostile to openly piratical activities. Nassau in the Bahamas began attracting pirates seeking alternatives to Jamaica, though it would not reach its full importance as a pirate haven until the following decade. The transformation of piracy during the 1690s extended beyond organisational and geographical changes to encompass significant evolution in the types of vessels employed and the tactics used in capturing prizes. The small, fast sloops and brigantines favoured by Caribbean buccaneers proved inadequate for the long voyages and major battles required for successful Indian Ocean operations. Pirates began seeking larger, more heavily armed vessels capable of challenging the formidable defences of Mughal treasure ships and European East Indiamen. The process of acquiring suitable vessels often required considerable planning and resources, leading to the development of more sophisticated financing arrangements among pirate groups. Successful captains like Every invested their profits in purchasing and outfitting larger ships, while less wealthy pirates pooled their resources to acquire shares in joint expeditions. These investment partnerships represented early examples of the complex financial relationships that would characterize later pirate enterprises. The crews required for major Indian Ocean expeditions typically numbered between 100 and 200 men, far larger than the 20 to 50 pirates common aboard Caribbean vessels. Recruiting and maintaining such large crews required captains to develop new methods of ensuring loyalty and discipline, while preserving the democratic principles that attracted men to piracy in the first place. The most successful pirate leaders of this period proved to be those who could balance the competing demands of military efficiency and egalitarian governance. The conclusion of the War of Spanish Succession through the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713, followed by the Treaty of Rastatt in 1714, created a massive displacement of maritime labour that would fundamentally reshape the landscape of Caribbean piracy. Over 40,000 privateers who had operated under legitimate commissions from various European powers suddenly found their legal authorization revoked and their specialized skills rendered worthless in peacetime economies. These men, trained in the arts of naval warfare, ship capture and maritime navigation, faced unemployment in colonial societies that had little use for their particular expertise during periods of peace. The economic disruption caused by this sudden demobilization extended far beyond individual hardship. Colonial ports that had thrived on the influx of captured enemy goods and the spending of successful privateers experienced severe economic contractions. Shipyards that had specialized in fitting out privateering vessels found their services no longer required. Merchants who had built profitable relationships with privateer captains discovered their networks of suppliers suddenly eliminated. Tavern keepers, provisioners, and other service providers who had catered to the privateer trade faced dramatic reductions in their customer base. Many former privateers initially attempted to find legitimate employment in the merchant marine or colonial navies, but peacetime shipping required far fewer experienced sailors than had been needed during the war years. Naval establishments reduced to skeleton crews during peacetime could absorb only a small fraction of the available maritime workforce. Merchant captains, operating under intense pressure to minimize costs, often preferred hiring inexperienced sailors at lower wages rather than paying premium rates for skilled former privateers. The demographic composition of this displaced maritime workforce proved particularly volatile. Most privateers were young men in their 20s and 30s who had spent their formative years engaged in legalized violence and accustomed to the democratic governance structures common aboard privateer vessels. They possessed extensive knowledge of Caribbean waters, familiarity with the latest naval tactics, and networks of contacts throughout the region's ports. More significantly, they had grown accustomed to the substantial profits possible through ship capture and had little patience for the meagre wages offered by legitimate employment. Nassau's transformation into the Caribbean's premier pirate stronghold resulted from a unique combination of geographical advantages and governmental weakness that created ideal conditions for establishing an autonomous pirate community. New Providence Island, where Nassau was situated, occupied a strategic position at the northeastern edge of the Bahama Islands, commanding the Windward Passage and the Straits of Florida, through which Spanish treasure ships and merchant vessels were obliged to pass when travelling between the Caribbean and Europe. The harbour at Nassau offered exceptional advantages for piratical operations, while presenting significant obstacles to potential attackers. The entrance to the harbour was protected by a sandbar that prevented large warships from approaching the town, while allowing the shallow draft sloops and brigantines favoured by pirates to pass freely. Once inside the harbour, vessels could anchor in protected waters surrounded by numerous small quays and inlets that provided additional security and multiple escape routes in case of attack. The island's topography further enhanced its defensive capabilities. Nassau itself was built on a narrow strip of land between the harbour and the Atlantic Ocean, with hills rising behind the town that provided excellent observation points for spotting approaching vessels. The surrounding waters contained numerous reefs and shoals that were well known to local pilots, but treacherous for unfamiliar navigators, creating natural barriers against hostile forces while providing safe passages for those with appropriate knowledge. The collapse of effective English colonial administration in the Bahamas created a power vacuum that pirates were quick to exploit. The islands had been devastated by combined French and Spanish attacks in 1703 and 1706, which destroyed most of the colonial infrastructure and scattered the English population. Governor George Haskett, appointed in 1701, proved unable to restore order or establish meaningful governmental authority. His death in 1706 left the colony without effective leadership, as subsequent gubernatorial appointments either failed to reach the islands or proved incapable of asserting control over the increasingly lawless population. The absence of governmental authority meant that Nassau lacked the basic institutions necessary for maintaining civil order. There were no functioning courts to adjudicate disputes, no militia to enforce laws, and no customs officials to regulate trade. The few remaining colonial officials possessed neither the resources nor the authority to challenge the growing pirate presence. This institutional vacuum allowed pirates to establish their own systems of governance and law enforcement, according to their particular needs and preferences. Benjamin Hornigold emerged as the dominant figure in Nassau's pirate community during the early years of its development as a pirate stronghold. Hornigold, an English sailor who had operated as a privateer during the War of Spanish Succession, possessed the experience, connections, and leadership abilities necessary to organize the diverse collection of pirates, refugees, and adventurers who had gathered on New Providence Island. His background as a legitimate privateer provided him with credibility among former colleagues, while his knowledge of naval tactics and Caribbean waters made him an effective military commander. Under Hornigold's leadership, the pirates of Nassau developed what contemporary observers described as the Flying Gang, a loose confederation of pirate crews that operated under common principles while maintaining individual autonomy. The Flying Gang was not a formal organisation with written bylaws or permanent structure, but rather an informal alliance based on mutual benefit and shared opposition to governmental authority. Crews could join or leave the alliance as circumstances dictated, but while participating they agreed to abide by certain common practices and provide mutual assistance when required. The governance structure that evolved within the Flying Gang reflected the democratic principles that had characterised pirate communities since the Buccaneer era, but with greater sophistication and formalisation. Major decisions affecting the entire pirate community were made through assemblies where each crew's representatives could voice their opinions and cast votes. These gatherings, typically held on the beach outside Nassau, resembled town meetings more than military councils, with extensive debate preceding any significant resolutions. Hornigold's role within this democratic framework was that of a first among equals rather than an absolute commander. While his experience and success earned him considerable influence, his authority depended on the continued support of other captains and their crews. He could propose courses of action and coordinate joint expeditions, but he could not compel other pirates to follow his directives if they disagreed with his judgment. This balance between leadership and democratic accountability proved crucial to maintaining unity among the fiercely independent pirate crews. The economic system that developed in Pirate Nassau operated on principles fundamentally different from those governing legitimate colonial economies. Rather than being based on agricultural production or manufacturing, Nassau's economy centered on the redistribution of wealth captured from Spanish and other merchant vessels. Pirates would arrive in port with holds full of captured goods, ranging from silver coins and precious stones to manufactured items and exotic commodities, which they would then exchange for supplies, services, and entertainment. The disposal of captured goods required the development of sophisticated commercial networks that could handle large quantities of valuable merchandise without attracting unwanted attention from colonial authorities. Jewish merchants, building on commercial relationships established during the buccaneering era, played crucial roles in these networks by providing connections to legitimate markets throughout the Caribbean and North American colonies. These merchants possessed the capital necessary to purchase entire shiploads of captured goods and the commercial expertise required to dispose of them profitably in distant markets. Local traders and provisioners quickly recognized the economic opportunities presented by the steady influx of wealthy pirates, seeking to exchange their captured treasures for immediate necessities and pleasures. Tavern keepers expanded their establishments to accommodate the hundreds of pirates who might arrive simultaneously when successful expeditions returned to port. Shipwrights and carpenters developed specialized services for maintaining and modifying pirate vessels, while gunsmiths and armourers provided weapons and ammunition for future expeditions. The social hierarchy that emerged in Pirate Nassau reflected both the egalitarian principles of pirate governance and the practical realities of organising complex maritime operations. Successful captains occupy positions of higher status, not merely because of their wealth, but because of their demonstrated abilities to lead profitable expeditions and maintain crew loyalty. These men often lived in considerable luxury, occupying the finest houses available and maintaining staffs of servants drawn from captured slaves and willing local inhabitants. Quartermasters and other senior officers formed a middle tier of pirate society, possessing both substantial wealth and important responsibilities within their respective crews. These men served as intermediaries between captains and ordinary crew members, ensuring that democratic principles were observed while maintaining the discipline necessary for effective operations. Their positions required considerable diplomatic skills, as they needed to balance competing interests while preserving crew unity. Ordinary pirates, despite their lowly rank within individual crews, enjoyed freedoms and opportunities unavailable to their counterparts in legitimate maritime employment. They participated in democratic decision-making processes, received equitable shares of captured wealth, and could aspire to advancement based on merit rather than social background. Many ordinary pirates accumulated sufficient wealth through successful expeditions to purchase shares in future ventures or establish themselves as independent operators. The relationship between pirates and Nassau's civilian population proved complex and often mutually beneficial, despite the obvious tensions inherent in such arrangements. Many local inhabitants had lost their livelihoods during the French and Spanish attacks of the previous decade and welcomed the economic opportunities provided by the pirate presence. Former planters became tavern keepers and merchants, while displaced servants and labourers found employment in the various trades that served pirate needs. Women played significant roles in Nassau's pirate economy, though their contributions were often overlooked by contemporary chroniclers focused on the more dramatic aspects of piratical activities. Female tavern keepers and merchants accumulated considerable wealth by catering to the needs of visiting pirates, while others invested directly in piratical ventures as silent partners who provided financial backing in exchange for shares of the profits. Some women accompanied pirate crews as partners or wives, participating in expeditions and sharing in the dangers and rewards of piratical life. The unique culture that developed in Nassau during this period represented a fascinating synthesis of influences drawn from throughout the Atlantic world. English common law traditions merged with Spanish colonial practices and African customs brought by escaped slaves and captured sailors. Religious observances reflected the diverse backgrounds of Nassau's inhabitants, with Anglican, Catholic, Jewish, and various Protestant denominations coexisting in relative harmony. The absence of established religious authority meant that individual conscience rather than institutional doctrine governed spiritual matters. Social customs in Nassau emphasized personal freedom and individual choice to a degree remarkable for the early 18th century. Racial barriers, while not entirely absent, proved far more permeable than in legitimate colonial societies. Successful pirates of African descent could achieve positions of authority and respect based on their abilities rather than their ancestry. Mixed-race relationships were common and generally accepted, producing a cosmopolitan population that reflected the international character of the pirate community. The daily routine of life in Nassau varied considerably depending on whether major expeditions were in port or at sea. When successful pirates returned with captured treasures, the town erupted into celebrations that might continue for weeks. Taverns remained open around the clock, gaming houses conducted continuous operations, and merchants did brisk business in luxury goods and exotic commodities. The streets filled with pirates displaying their wealth through elaborate clothing and generous spending, creating an atmosphere of carnival-like excess. During quieter periods when most crews were at sea, Nassau took on a more subdued character resembling that of any small colonial port. Remaining inhabitants focused on maintaining the infrastructure necessary to support returning expeditions, repairing ships and buildings damaged during previous celebrations, and preparing for the next influx of wealthy pirates. These intervals provided opportunities for planning future expeditions and resolving disputes that had arisen during the excitement of recent arrivals. The military organisation of Nassau's pirate community evolved to meet the challenges posed by increasingly aggressive governmental efforts to suppress piracy. Watch systems were established to provide early warning of approaching warships, while defensive positions were prepared at strategic points around the harbour. The pirates' intimate knowledge of local waters and their possession of numerous fast manoeuvrable vessels provided significant advantages against attacking forces unfamiliar with the treacherous navigation required to approach Nassau safely. Intelligence networks developed by Nassau's pirates extended throughout the Caribbean and along the North American coast, providing advance warning of governmental expeditions and information about valuable shipping movements. These networks relied on sympathetic merchants, corrupt colonial officials, and fellow pirates operating from other bases to gather and transmit crucial information. The effectiveness of these intelligence systems often allowed Nassau's pirates to avoid confrontations with superior forces, while identifying profitable targets for their expeditions. The international character of Nassau's pirate population created diplomatic complications for European governments attempting to suppress piratical activities. English pirates operating from Nassau could claim sanctuary under English colonial law, while French and Spanish pirates could invoke the protection of their respective governments when convenient. These legal ambiguities were skillfully exploited by pirate leaders who understood how to manipulate competing national jurisdictions to their advantage. The success of Nassau as a pirate stronghold attracted increasing attention from colonial and metropolitan authorities, who recognized the threat posed by an autonomous pirate community operating in such a strategically important location. The wealth accumulated by Nassau's pirates and their growing boldness in attacking merchant vessels of all nations created pressure for decisive action to eliminate this threat to legitimate commerce. However, the logistical challenges involved in mounting an effective assault on Nassau's well-defended position, combined with the political complications arising from the international character of the pirate community, made immediate action difficult to organise and execute. The period between 1715 and 1720 witnessed the emergence of the most sophisticated and profitable pirate operations in Caribbean history, as the autonomous community established in Nassau reached its zenith of power and influence. The pirates operating from this stronghold developed unprecedented levels of tactical coordination and strategic planning that transformed individual acts of maritime robbery into systematic campaigns against the colonial trade networks that connected Europe with its American possessions. The Spanish treasure fleets remained the most coveted targets for Caribbean pirates, despite the formidable defences that had been developed over centuries of experience with piratical attacks. These fleets, known as the flotta system, operated on carefully timed schedules that brought together merchant vessels from throughout the Spanish colonial empire at designated rendezvous points before sailing in convoy formation back to Spain. The Tierra Firme fleet typically departed from Portobello in Panama after collecting silver from the mines of Potosi, while the New Spain fleet gathered at Veracruz to transport Mexican gold and manufactured goods from Manila galleons that had crossed the Pacific. The concentration of such enormous wealth within relatively predictable sailing patterns created irresistible opportunities for pirates willing to invest the resources and manpower necessary to challenge heavily defended convoys. A single successful attack on a major treasure ship could yield profits exceeding anything possible through years of raiding individual merchant vessels. The capture of the Nuestra Señora de la Concepción by Henry Jennings in 1715, following the wreck of the Spanish treasure fleet off the Florida coast, demonstrated the spectacular rewards available to pirates who could successfully penetrate Spanish defences. Jennings had learned of the Spanish salvage operations through intelligence networks that extended from Nassau to Havana, providing detailed information about the locations where Spanish divers were recovering silver and gold from the wrecked vessels. Operating with a flotilla of 3 sloops and approximately 300 men, Jennings attacked the Spanish salvage camp at the site of the wrecked flagship, overwhelming the guards and seizing silver worth an estimated 350,000 pieces of 8. This single operation netted each of Jennings' men profits equivalent to several years' wages in legitimate employment. while establishing his reputation as one of the most successful pirate commanders of his generation. The intelligence-gathering capabilities that made such operations possible represented a remarkable achievement in early 18th century communications technology. Pirates operating from Nassau maintained networks of informants in Spanish colonial ports who provided regular reports on treasure fleet preparations, sailing schedules, and cargo manifests. These intelligence networks relied on a diverse collection of sources including corrupt colonial officials, sympathetic merchants, enslaved persons working in Spanish warehouses, and fellow pirates operating from other bases throughout the Caribbean. Information travelled through these networks via a complex system of coded messages carried by merchant vessels, fishing boats, and other seemingly innocent craft that moved freely between Caribbean ports. A merchant captain departing Havana might carry a seemingly routine business letter that actually contained detailed intelligence about Spanish military preparations, while a fishing vessel operating near Cartagena could relay information about treasure ship departures to contacts in Jamaica or Nassau. The effectiveness of these intelligence systems often provided pirates with more accurate information about Spanish shipping movements than was available to legitimate colonial administrators. The tactical innovations developed by Caribbean pirates during this period revolutionized maritime warfare and influenced naval practices throughout the Atlantic world. The traditional approach to ship capture, which relied primarily on superior firepower to disable enemy vessels before boarding, proved inadequate when confronting the massive guns and thick hulls of Spanish treasure galleons. Pirates instead developed new methods that emphasized speed, maneuverability, and psychological warfare to overcome opponents who possessed superior material resources. The vessels employed by Caribbean pirates were specifically selected and modified to maximize their advantages in speed and agility, while minimizing their exposure to enemy fire. Sloops and brigantines, typically measuring between 60 and 100 feet in length with crews of 75 to 150 men, could achieve speeds of up to 11 knots under favourable conditions while drawing less than 8 feet of water. These shallow drafts allowed pirate vessels to operate in coastal waters and among coral reefs where larger warships could not safely navigate, providing crucial tactical advantages during both attacks and escapes. Modifications to pirate vessels focused on maximising their combat effectiveness while maintaining the speed and manoeuvrability that were their primary assets. Additional gun ports were cut into the sides of captured merchant vessels to accommodate more cannons, while internal bulkheads were removed to create more space for crew members during boarding actions. Reinforced boarding nets were installed to protect crew members from enemy fire, while grappling hooks and other specialised equipment were positioned for quick deployment during ship-to-ship combat. The psychological warfare tactics employed by Caribbean pirates proved as important as their material innovations in achieving success against superior opponents. The development of distinctive pirate flags, each associated with particular captains and their reputations for violence or mercy, created powerful tools for intimidating potential victims before combat even began. Edward Teach's flag, featuring a skeleton holding an hourglass and a spear pointed at a bleeding heart, conveyed a clear message about the fate awaiting those who chose to resist rather than surrender. The cultivation of fearsome reputations required careful attention to both spectacular displays of violence against those who resisted and conspicuous mercy toward those who surrendered without fighting. Pirates who developed reputations for keeping their word when offering quarter found that merchant crews were more likely to surrender immediately, reducing the risks and costs associated with prolonged battles. Conversely, those known for treachery or excessive cruelty often faced desperate resistance from crews who expected no mercy, regardless of their actions. Boarding techniques developed by Caribbean pirates emphasized overwhelming numerical superiority and coordinated attacks that could quickly seize control of enemy vessels before organized resistance could develop. Successful boarding actions typically began with the deployment of multiple small boats carrying 15 to 20 heavily armed pirates who would approach the target vessel from different angles simultaneously. These boarding parties carried an arsenal of weapons including cutlasses, pistols, boarding axes, and grenades designed to create maximum confusion and terror among defending crews. The timing of boarding attacks required precise coordination between different elements of the pirate force. Cannon fire would be concentrated on the target vessel's quarterdeck and forecastle to eliminate officers and disable defensive positions, while sharpshooters armed with muskets would target individual defenders from the rigging of the attacking vessel. Once the initial bombardment had created sufficient confusion, boarding parties would swarm over the sides of the target vessel from multiple directions, making it impossible for defenders to concentrate their resistance effectively. The economic systems that supported Caribbean pirate operations during this period achieved levels of sophistication that rivaled those of legitimate commercial enterprises. The disposal of captured goods required complex networks of buyers, transporters and financiers who could handle large quantities of valuable merchandise while maintaining the secrecy necessary to avoid detection by colonial authorities. These networks extended throughout the Caribbean and along the North American coast, connecting pirate strongholds with legitimate markets in Charleston, New York, Boston, and other major commercial centers. Jewish merchants continued to play crucial roles in these networks, building on commercial relationships established during earlier periods of buccaneering activity. Families like the Lucinas in Jamaica and the Franks in New York possessed both the capital necessary to purchase entire shiploads of captured goods and the international connections required to dispose of them profitably in European markets. These merchants typically purchased captured goods at 20 to 30% of their legitimate market value, providing pirates with immediate cash while assuming the risks associated with transportation and resale. The relationship between pirates and corrupt colonial officials created additional opportunities for disposing of captured goods through quasi-legitimate channels. Governors, customs officials, and naval commanders who received appropriate compensation often proved willing to overlook the obvious origins of valuable merchandise offered for sale by seemingly respectable merchants. The governor of North Carolina, Charles Eden, maintained such close relationships with pirates that his residence served as an unofficial headquarters for planning expeditions and negotiating the sale of captured goods. The flow of pirate wealth through colonial economies created multiplier effects that extended far beyond the immediate participants in piratical activities. Successful pirates spent their profits on luxury goods, elaborate housing and expensive entertainment, creating demand for services provided by legitimate craftsmen, merchants and professionals. A single successful expedition returning to Nassau might inject thousands of pieces of eight into the local economy, supporting dozens of families who had no direct involvement in piratical activities. The disruption of Spanish silver shipments represented perhaps the most significant economic impact of Caribbean pirate operations during this period. The regular attacks on treasure fleets and individual treasure ships reduced the flow of American silver into European markets, contributing to monetary instability and inflation throughout the Atlantic world. Spanish colonial administrators reported that insurance rates for treasure shipments had increased by 300% between 1715 and 1720, while many merchants chose to delay shipments rather than risk losses to pirate attacks. The impact on intercolonial trade proved equally significant, as pirates expanded their operations beyond Spanish targets to include merchant vessels of all nations operating in Caribbean waters. The sugar trade between the Caribbean islands and North American ports faced particular disruption, as the predictable routes followed by sugar ships made them vulnerable to systematic pirate attacks. Merchant vessels travelling between Charleston and Barbados reported encountering pirate vessels on nearly every voyage, forcing them to sail in convoy formation and employ armed escorts that significantly increased transportation costs. Major ports throughout the Caribbean implemented new defensive measures in response to the growing boldness of pirate attacks. Havana expanded its fortifications and increased the size of its naval garrison, while Cartagena invested in additional coastal batteries and patrol vessels. These defensive improvements required substantial expenditures by colonial governments already strained by the costs of maintaining overseas territories, creating additional economic burdens that reduced the profitability of colonial enterprises. The most spectacular pirate campaigns of this period demonstrated the extent to which organised pirate forces could challenge the maritime supremacy of European colonial powers. Blackbeard's blockade of Charleston Harbour in May 1718 represented an unprecedented assertion of pirate authority over legitimate colonial commerce. Operating with a squadron of 4 vessels and approximately 400 men, Teach established a complete blockade of one of North America's most important ports, capturing every vessel that attempted to enter or leave the harbour over a period of nearly a week. The Charleston blockade achieved its immediate objective of securing medical supplies for Teach's crew, while demonstrating the vulnerability of colonial ports to determined pirate attacks. The psychological impact proved even more significant than the material damage, as colonial authorities throughout North America recognized that no port was safe from similar attacks if pirates chose to concentrate their forces effectively. The successful completion of the blockade without interference from colonial military forces highlighted the inadequacy of existing defences against coordinated pirate operations. The coordination required for such large-scale operations necessitated new forms of communication and cooperation among pirate crews that had traditionally operated as independent entities. The development of standardized signals, coordinated sailing formations, and unified command structures during major expeditions represented remarkable achievements in military organization by men who lacked formal training in naval tactics. These innovations were facilitated by the concentration of experienced former naval officers among pirate crews, many of whom had served in European navies during the War of Spanish Succession. The intelligence networks that supported major pirate campaigns extended far beyond the Caribbean to include sources in European ports where Spanish and other colonial vessels originated. Agents in Cadiz, Lisbon, and other European ports provided advance warning of treasure fleet departures, cargo manifests, and escort arrangements that allowed pirates to position themselves advantageously along expected routes. This international intelligence capability gave Caribbean pirates strategic advantages that were unavailable to their predecessors, who had operated with limited knowledge of enemy movements and intentions. The systematic nature of pirate operations during this period extended to their approach to crew recruitment and training. Nassau served as an informal naval academy where experienced pirates taught newcomers the specialized skills required for successful ship capture and maritime warfare. Young men arriving in Nassau with no previous experience at sea could receive comprehensive training in navigation, gunnery, seamanship, and combat tactics from veterans who had participated in dozens of successful expeditions. The training programs developed by pirate crews emphasized practical skills and hands-on experience rather than theoretical knowledge. New recruits learned navigation by participating in actual voyages, developed gunnery skills by practicing with captured cannons, and mastered boarding techniques through realistic combat exercises. This practical approach to education produced highly skilled mariners who often possessed superior abilities compared to their counterparts in legitimate naval service, where training opportunities were limited and advancement was restricted by rigid hierarchical structures. The demographic composition of pirate crews during this period reflected the international character of Caribbean maritime communities. English sailors formed the largest single group, but substantial numbers of French, Spanish, Dutch, Portuguese, and African pirates participated in major expeditions. This diversity created both opportunities and challenges for pirate commanders who needed to maintain unity among men of different cultural backgrounds, languages, and loyalties. The integration of former slaves and free blacks into pirate crews represented one of the most remarkable aspects of Caribbean pirate society during this period. men of African descent could achieve positions of authority and respect based on their abilities rather than their racial background, creating opportunities for advancement that were unavailable in legitimate colonial society. Black pirates like Black Caesar and Diego Grillo commanded their own vessels and participated as equals in the democratic assemblies that governed major pirate expeditions. The role of women in Caribbean pirate operations extended beyond the support functions typically acknowledged by contemporary chroniclers. Anne Bonny and Mary Read, the most famous female pirates of this period, participated directly in combat operations and commanded the respect of their male colleagues through their demonstrated courage and skill. Other women served as intelligence agents, financial backers, and logistical coordinators who provided essential support for pirate operations while maintaining their cover as legitimate colonial residents. The systematic campaigns that had established Caribbean pirates as masters of their domain during the previous years created the foundation for individual captains to achieve unprecedented levels of notoriety and influence. The concentration of experienced mariners, sophisticated intelligence networks, and accumulated wealth in strongholds like Nassau enabled certain pirates to transcend the limitations of traditional ship-to-ship robbery and establish themselves as regional powers capable of challenging colonial authorities directly. These exceptional figures combined tactical brilliance with theatrical flair, creating public personas that amplified their actual capabilities and transformed them into legendary figures whose reputations often proved more powerful than their cannons. Edward Teach emerged from the ranks of Benjamin Hornigold's crew in late 1716 to become the most feared pirate captain in the Western Hemisphere through a carefully orchestrated campaign of psychological warfare and strategic positioning. Teach, whose origins remain obscured by conflicting contemporary accounts, possessed the physical presence and tactical acumen necessary to command respect among the hardened criminals and former naval personnel who comprised Nassau's pirate population. Standing well over 6 feet tall with a massive black beard that he wove with hemp and slow-burning matches during combat, Teach cultivated an appearance calculated to strike terror into the hearts of his victims before any shots were fired. The transformation of Edward Teach into Blackbeard represented a masterful exercise in personal branding that preceded modern advertising techniques by centuries. Teach understood that his reputation for ferocity and unpredictability could accomplish more than superior firepower in persuading merchant crews to surrender without resistance. He deliberately fostered stories about his supernatural origins and demonic powers, encouraging crew members to spread tales of his ability to survive, wounds that would kill ordinary men, and his practice of drinking rum mixed with gunpowder to demonstrate his inhuman constitution. Blackbeard's flagship, the Queen Anne's Revenge, served as both a formidable weapon of war and a floating stage for theatrical displays designed to enhance his fearsome reputation. The vessel, originally a French slave ship named La Concorde that Teach had captured near St. Vincent in November 1717, measured approximately 200 feet in length and displaced over 300 tons. Teach's modifications transformed the ship into one of the most heavily armed pirate vessels ever recorded, mounting 40 cannons of various calibers, along with an arsenal of swivel guns, small arms, and specialized boarding equipment. The Queen Anne's Revenge became a symbol of pirate power throughout the Caribbean, as Teach used the vessel to establish dominance over crucial shipping lanes between the Windward Islands and the North American mainland. The ship's imposing size and heavy armament allowed Teach to challenge vessels that smaller pirate crews would have avoided, including well-armed merchantmen and even small naval vessels. The psychological impact of encountering such a formidable pirate ship often proved sufficient to secure surrender without combat, as merchant captains recognized the futility of resistance against such overwhelming force. Teach's tactical innovations extended beyond mere intimidation to include sophisticated coordination of multiple vessels operating under his command. By early 1718, Blackbeard commanded a flotilla of 4 ships with a combined crew of nearly 400 men, creating the largest pirate force assembled in the Caribbean since Henry Morgan's expeditions against Panama 50 years earlier. This concentration of naval power enabled Teach to undertake operations that would have been impossible for individual pirate crews, including the audacious blockade of Charleston that demonstrated his ability to paralyze colonial commerce at will. The Charleston blockade, executed in May 1718, represented the pinnacle of Blackbeard's career and the most brazen assertion of pirate authority over colonial trade ever attempted. Teach positioned his squadron outside Charleston Harbour and systematically captured every vessel attempting to enter or leave the port, including the pilot boat that guided ships through the treacherous sandbars protecting the harbour entrance. Within days, Teach had accumulated a collection of prominent Charleston citizens as hostages, including Samuel Wragg, a member of the Colonial Council, and his 4-year-old son. The audacity of holding an entire colonial port hostage while making specific demands for medical supplies revealed both Teach's strategic sophistication and his understanding of colonial vulnerabilities. Charleston's merchants and officials found themselves powerless to resist his demands, as the colonial government lacked naval forces capable of challenging Teach's squadron. The successful completion of the blockade after receiving the requested medical chest demonstrated to colonial authorities throughout North America that pirates possessed the capability to disrupt commerce whenever they chose to concentrate their forces effectively. Teach's relationship with North Carolina officials illuminated the complex web of corruption and accommodation that enabled pirate operations throughout the colonial period. Governor Charles Eden and his Secretary and Collector of Customs, Tobias Knight, maintained such close relationships with Blackbeard that contemporary observers accused them of serving as partners in his enterprises. Eden granted Teach an official pardon under the terms of the royal proclamation issued by King George I, while Knight provided legal cover for the disposal of captured goods through his position in the colonial administration. The arrangements between Teach and North Carolina officials extended beyond simple bribery to encompass a sophisticated system of mutual benefit that served the interests of both parties. Teach provided the colonial government with intelligence about Spanish military preparations and French privateering activities, while his presence deterred attacks by rival pirate crews who might otherwise have threatened North Carolina's commerce. In exchange, colonial officials offered legal protection and assistance in converting captured goods into usable currency through seemingly legitimate commercial transactions. Bathtown, North Carolina's colonial capital, became Blackbeard's primary base of operations during the final phase of his career, providing him with a secure retreat where he could maintain his vessels and dispose of captured goods without fear of interference from hostile authorities. Teach purchased a house in Bathtown and married a local woman, creating the appearance of respectability while continuing his piratical activities. His integration into colonial society demonstrated the extent to which successful pirates could manipulate legal and social institutions to protect their interests. The contradictions inherent in Teach's position as both a feared pirate and a respectable colonial resident reflected broader tensions within colonial society regarding the boundaries between legitimate and illegitimate commerce. Many colonial merchants and officials recognized that pirate activities provided economic benefits through the influx of captured goods and Spanish silver, even as they publicly condemned piracy as a threat to lawful trade. This ambivalence created opportunities for pirates like Teach to exploit legal ambiguities and social connections to their advantage. Samuel Bellamy's rise to prominence followed a different trajectory from Blackbeard's theatrical approach, emphasizing egalitarian principles and democratic governance that attracted followers through ideological appeal rather than fear. Bellamy, known to his contemporaries as Black Sam for his preference for black clothing rather than the gaudy attire favoured by many pirate captains, had served as a crew member under Benjamin Hornigold before establishing himself as an independent commander in 1716. His background as a former sailor in the Royal Navy provided him with the technical expertise necessary for successful pirate operations, while his political philosophy attracted men who valued personal freedom and equitable treatment. Bellamy's capture of the Whydah galley in February 1717 represented both the pinnacle of his success and a demonstration of the sophisticated tactics employed by the most skilled pirate commanders of the period. The Whydah, a three-masted galley ship measuring 102 feet in length and displacing 300 tons, had been constructed specifically for the African slave trade, with reinforced holds and additional crew quarters designed to accommodate human cargo during the Middle Passage. The vessel's recent completion of a successful slaving voyage from West Africa to Jamaica meant that its holds contained not only the profits from the sale of enslaved persons, but also a cargo of sugar, indigo, and other valuable commodities destined for London markets. The pursuit of the Whydah required Bellamy to demonstrate exceptional seamanship and tactical judgment, as the slave ship's captain, Lawrence Prince, possessed both superior firepower and intimate knowledge of Caribbean waters. Bellamy's flagship, a sloop mounting only 10 guns compared to the Whydah's 18 cannons, could achieve victory only through superior speed and maneuverability. The chase extended over 3 days and covered more than 300 miles as Prince attempted to reach the safety of Port Royal, while Bellamy gradually closed the distance between the vessels. Bellamy's eventual capture of the Whydah demonstrated his ability to combine aggressive tactics with diplomatic skills that minimized bloodshed while achieving his objectives. Rather than attempting to sink or disable the larger vessel through cannon fire, Bellamy positioned his sloop to prevent the Whydah's escape while offering generous terms to Prince and his crew. The successful negotiation resulted in the surrender of one of the most valuable prizes captured by any pirate during the Golden Age, while establishing Bellamy's reputation as a commander who achieved success through skill rather than brutality. The transformation of the Whydah from slave ship to pirate flagship required extensive modifications that reflected Bellamy's understanding of the specialized requirements for piratical operations. Additional gun ports were cut into the vessel's sides to accommodate the 28 cannons that Bellamy eventually mounted, while internal bulkheads were removed to create more space for his crew of 146 men. The ship's original slave quarters were converted into storage areas for captured goods and ammunition, while new accommodations were constructed for the diverse collection of pirates who joined Bellamy's crew. Bellamy's approach to crew management distinguished him from many contemporary pirate captains through his emphasis on democratic decision-making and equitable treatment of all crew members regardless of their racial or national backgrounds. The articles governing his crew established profit-sharing arrangements that provided generous compensation for ordinary sailors while limiting the captain's share to prevent excessive concentration of wealth. These egalitarian principles attracted men who had experienced harsh treatment aboard merchant vessels and naval ships, creating intense loyalty among crew members who recognized that their interests were genuinely represented in Bellamy's governance. The international composition of Bellamy's crew reflected both his egalitarian principles and the cosmopolitan character of Caribbean maritime communities during this period. Former slaves who had escaped from plantations served alongside English sailors, French privateers, and Spanish deserters, creating a microcosm of Atlantic world diversity that challenged conventional racial and national boundaries. African pirates like John Julian, who served as Bellamy's pilot and navigator, achieved positions of authority based on their demonstrated abilities rather than their social backgrounds. Bellamy's political philosophy, as recorded in contemporary accounts of his speeches to captured crews, articulated a coherent critique of existing social and economic hierarchies that anticipated later revolutionary ideologies. He argued that pirates represented the only truly free men in a world dominated by oppressive governments and exploitative merchants, claiming that piratical redistribution of wealth served justice better than the legal systems that protected the property of the rich while condemning the poor to perpetual servitude. These arguments proved persuasive to many sailors who had experienced firsthand the harsh realities of legitimate maritime employment. The tragic destruction of the Haida off Cape Cod on April 26, 1717, eliminated one of the most successful pirate operations of the Golden Age, while providing modern archaeologists with unprecedented insights into the material culture of early 18th century piracy. The storm that drove Bellamy's flagship onto the shoals near Wellfleet occurred as the pirates were returning to their base after a successful cruise that had netted them several valuable prizes. The loss of the ship and most of its crew, including Bellamy himself, demonstrated the constant dangers faced by pirates operating in unfamiliar waters during the treacherous spring weather conditions common along the North American coast. The wreck of the Haida preserved a remarkable collection of artifacts that illuminated aspects of pirate life rarely documented in contemporary written sources. Archaeological excavations have recovered thousands of coins from throughout the Atlantic world, demonstrating the international scope of pirate operations and the diverse sources of their wealth. Personal belongings recovered from the wreck site revealed the extent to which successful pirates could afford luxury items, including fine jewellery, expensive weapons, and exotic commodities that would have been beyond the reach of ordinary sailors. Bartholomew Roberts emerged as the most systematic and successful pirate commander of the Golden Age through his methodical approach to maritime warfare and his innovative organisational techniques. Roberts, a Welsh sailor who had served aboard legitimate merchant vessels before turning to piracy in 1719, possessed the analytical mind and administrative skills necessary to transform piratical activities from opportunistic raids into carefully planned campaigns that maximise profits while minimising risks. His rapid rise from ordinary crew member to supreme commander of the largest pirate fleet ever assembled demonstrated both his exceptional abilities and the opportunities available to talented individuals within pirate society. Robert's entry into piracy resulted from circumstances beyond his control when the slave ship Princess, on which he served as third mate, was captured by Howell Davis near the Gold Coast of West Africa in June 1719. Davis, recognising Robert's navigational skills and leadership potential, offered him the choice between joining the pirate crew or facing marooning on the African coast. Robert's decision to accept Davis's offer proved fortuitous for both men, as Robert's expertise in African waters and his knowledge of slave trading operations provided Davis with crucial advantages in planning future expeditions. The assassination of Howell Davis during a failed attack on the Portuguese fortress at Principe in July 1719 created an unexpected opportunity for Roberts to demonstrate his leadership capabilities. The democratic election that followed Davis's death resulted in Roberts' selection as captain despite his relatively brief experience as a pirate, reflecting the crew's recognition of his superior abilities and their confidence in his judgment. Roberts' acceptance of command marked the beginning of a piratical career that would establish him as the most feared and successful pirate captain of his generation. Roberts' systematic approach to piracy began with his development of comprehensive intelligence networks that provided detailed information about merchant shipping patterns, naval patrol schedules, and the defensive capabilities of potential targets. These networks extended throughout the Atlantic world, connecting informants in European ports with agents in American and African coastal settlements. The quality of intelligence available to Roberts often exceeded that possessed by legitimate naval commanders, enabling him to position his forces advantageously while avoiding confrontations with superior enemy forces. The organisational innovations implemented by Roberts transformed pirate fleet operations from loose confederations of independent crews into disciplined military formations capable of executing complex strategic plans. Roberts established standardised signals for communication between vessels, coordinated sailing formations that maximise mutual support during combat, and unified command structures that ensured rapid response to changing tactical situations. These innovations required extensive training and discipline among crew members who had traditionally valued individual autonomy above collective efficiency. Roberts's fleet reached its maximum size in 1721 when he commanded 4 major vessels with a combined crew of nearly 500 men, making him the admiral of the largest pirate force ever assembled. The flagship Royal Fortune, a former French frigate mounting 40 guns, served as the command centre for operations that extended from the Caribbean to the coast of West Africa. Supporting vessels included the Good Fortune, a brigantine with 20 guns, and 2 sloops that provided reconnaissance and pursuit capabilities for the main battle fleet. The coordination required to maintain such a large force presented unprecedented logistical challenges that Roberts addressed through innovations in supply management and crew administration. Detailed records were maintained of ammunition expenditure, food consumption, and equipment maintenance requirements, enabling Roberts to plan extended cruises without depending on frequent returns to friendly ports for resupply. These administrative systems allowed Roberts's fleet to operate independently for months at a time while maintaining combat effectiveness and crew morale. Roberts' administrative innovations and fleet coordination techniques represented the culmination of organizational developments that had begun decades earlier with the establishment of the pirate round, a revolutionary approach to maritime robbery that transformed individual ship captures into systematic exploitation of global trade networks. The round represented far more than a simple sailing route. It constituted a comprehensive strategy for maximizing piratical profits by targeting the wealthiest shipping lanes in the world, while exploiting the jurisdictional gaps that existed between competing European colonial empires. The concept of the pirate round emerged from the recognition that the Indian Ocean offered opportunities for wealth accumulation that far exceeded anything available in traditional Caribbean hunting grounds. While Spanish treasure fleets carried substantial quantities of American silver, the annual monsoon-driven trade between India and the Arabian Peninsula transported the accumulated wealth of the Mughal Empire, including precious stones, silk, spices, and vast quantities of gold and silver coins. The ships carrying Muslim pilgrims to Mecca represented particularly attractive targets, as wealthy Indians often liquidated their entire fortunes to finance their religious journeys, carrying their life savings in easily transportable forms. Thomas Tew pioneered the systematic exploitation of Indian Ocean opportunities through his establishment of a reliable route that connected American colonial ports with the pirate strongholds developing along the coast of Madagascar. Tew, operating from Newport, Rhode Island, under a commission from Governor Benjamin Fletcher of New York, departed American waters in late 1692 with a crew of 60 men aboard the sloop Amity. His ostensible mission involved attacking French settlements along the West African coast, but Tew had already determined to pursue the far more lucrative opportunities available in the Indian Ocean. The voyage from America to Madagascar required exceptional navigational skills and careful planning, as the route covered over 12,000 miles through waters that were poorly charted and subject to seasonal weather patterns that could trap unwary mariners for months. Tew's successful navigation of this route demonstrated both his superior seamanship and his understanding of Indian Ocean sailing conditions, gained through conversations with former East India Company sailors who had joined his crew. The journey required approximately 4 months under favourable conditions, with stops at various Atlantic islands for water and provisions. Tew's arrival at Madagascar in early 1693 coincided with the establishment of permanent pirate settlements along the island's northeastern coast, where earlier arrivals had already begun developing the infrastructure necessary to support extended Indian Ocean operations. The island's strategic location, positioned directly along the shipping routes connecting India with the Arabian Peninsula and East Africa, made it an ideal base for intercepting the valuable cargoes that passed through these waters during the annual monsoon seasons. The natural advantages offered by Madagascar's geography proved crucial to the success of pirate operations in the Indian Ocean. The island's extensive coastline contained numerous protected harbours that could accommodate vessels of any size while providing security from both storms and hostile warships. Dense tropical forests supplied timber for ship repairs and construction, while abundant freshwater streams and fertile soil supported permanent settlements. Most importantly, the absence of effective European colonial control over much of Madagascar's territory meant that pirates could establish bases without fear of sudden attack by metropolitan military forces. Adam Baldridge's trading post on Ile Sainte-Marie became the commercial heart of Madagascar's pirate community, providing essential services that connected Indian Ocean pirates with global markets for their captured goods. Baldridge, a former buccaneer who had fled Jamaica following legal troubles, recognised that the success of Madagascar-based piracy depended on the development of reliable systems for converting captured Asian goods into usable currency and supplies. His establishment functioned simultaneously as a warehouse, bank, and communications centre that enabled pirates to operate effectively thousands of miles from their home ports. The trading relationships that Baldridge established with local Malagasy rulers demonstrated the complex diplomatic arrangements necessary to maintain pirate settlements in territories controlled by indigenous populations. The Malagasy kingdoms that controlled different sections of Madagascar's coast possessed sophisticated political systems and military capabilities that required respectful negotiation rather than simple conquest. Pirates seeking to establish bases needed to offer valuable goods and services to local rulers in exchange for permission to use harbours and construct facilities. The most successful pirate-Malagasy relationships involved mutually beneficial arrangements where pirates provided European-manufactured goods, firearms, and military assistance in exchange for territorial concessions and protection from rival European powers. Some pirates married into prominent Malagasy families, creating kinship ties that strengthened their political positions while providing them with local knowledge essential for successful operations. These intermarriage patterns created mixed communities where European and African cultures blended to produce unique social formations that challenged conventional colonial hierarchies. Tu's first successful capture in Indian Ocean waters occurred near the entrance to the Red Sea in late 1693, when his crew overwhelmed a large Mughal vessel carrying approximately 100,000 rupees in gold and silver, along with valuable cargo including precious stones and silk cloth. The attack demonstrated both the exceptional wealth available in these waters and the relatively light defences protecting many Asian merchant vessels, which relied more on seasonal sailing patterns and diplomatic arrangements than military escorts for protection from piracy. The distribution of profits from Tu's first Indian Ocean capture provided each crew member with approximately £1,200, representing more than 20 years' wages for an ordinary sailor in legitimate employment. This spectacular success attracted immediate attention throughout the Atlantic pirate community, as news of Tu's achievements spread through the informal networks that connected pirate havens from Madagascar to Nassau. The demonstration that American-based pirates could successfully operate in the Indian Ocean while returning home with enormous profits inspired numerous imitators who sought to replicate Tu's success. The return voyage to America presented significant challenges that required careful planning and substantial resources. The monsoon patterns that governed Indian Ocean sailing meant that departures from Madagascar needed to be timed precisely to take advantage of favourable winds while avoiding the cyclone season that could destroy vessels caught in the wrong waters at the wrong time. The long voyage home required extensive provisioning and maintenance capabilities that could only be provided by well-established bases with adequate facilities and reliable supply networks. Tu's successful return to Newport in April 1694 created a sensation throughout the American colonies, as word spread of his crew's extraordinary wealth and their tales of adventure in exotic lands. The pirates' conspicuous spending in colonial ports provided tangible evidence of the profits available through Indian Ocean operations, while their stories of weakly defended treasure ships and friendly native rulers encouraged others to attempt similar ventures. Colonial merchants recognized new opportunities for investment in piratical expeditions that promised returns far exceeding those available through legitimate trade. The expansion of American participation in Indian Ocean piracy accelerated rapidly following Tew's demonstration of its profitability. Frederick Phillips, a wealthy New York merchant, invested heavily in piratical expeditions while maintaining his respectable position in colonial society. His ships carried supplies to Madagascar and returned with Asian goods that were sold in American markets at enormous profits. These arrangements created complex financial relationships that blurred the boundaries between legitimate commerce and piratical enterprise. The development of systematic supply lines between American ports and Madagascar required sophisticated coordination between pirates, merchants, and corrupt colonial officials. Ships departing American ports carried manufactured goods, firearms, ammunition, and provisions needed by pirate communities, while return voyages brought Asian treasures that were disposed of through established commercial networks. These supply lines operated with the knowledge and often the active participation of colonial governors who recognized the economic benefits of the pirate trade. The emergence of the Red Sea Men as a distinct category of Indian Ocean pirates reflected both the exceptional opportunities available in Arabian waters and the particular challenges associated with attacking Muslim pilgrimage vessels. The annual Hajj created predictable concentrations of wealth as pilgrims from throughout the Islamic world converged on Jeddah before proceeding to Mecca. The ships carrying these pilgrims often transported the life savings of entire families, creating opportunities for captures that could yield profits exceeding those available from attacking even the largest European merchant vessels. The religious and political sensitivities surrounding attacks on pilgrimage ships created international complications that extended far beyond the immediate profits gained by successful pirates. The Mughal Empire, which controlled much of the Indian subcontinent and maintained extensive trade relationships with European powers, viewed attacks on Muslim pilgrims as religious persecution that demanded immediate retaliation. Emperor Aurangzeb's threats to expel all European traders from Mughal territories in response to pirate attacks created diplomatic crises that forced European governments to take unprecedented action against piracy. Henry Every's capture of the Ganges Sawai in September 1695 represented the most spectacular success achieved by any Red Sea pirate, but it also demonstrated the international consequences that could result from particularly audacious attacks on Muslim shipping. The massive Mughal treasure ship, belonging personally to Emperor Aurangzeb and carrying an estimated 600,000 rupees along with precious stones and other valuables, fell to Every's flotilla after a battle that reportedly lasted several hours and involved the coordination of multiple pirate vessels. Contemporary accounts describe the Ganges Sawai as one of the largest and most heavily defended merchant vessels operating in Indian Ocean waters, measuring over 1,600 tons with 80 guns and a crew of 400 armed men. The ship's capture required exceptional tactical skill and coordination, as Every's force needed to overcome not only superior firepower, but also the advantage of fighting from a larger, more stable platform. The successful boarding of such a formidable vessel demonstrated the combat effectiveness that experienced pirate crews could achieve through superior training and motivation. The aftermath of the Ganges Sawai capture created a diplomatic crisis that threatened to disrupt the entire system of European trade with Asia. Emperor Aurangzeb's demand for compensation and punishment of the pirates responsible placed the English East India Company in an impossible position, as the company lacked the military capability to capture Every while facing potential losses worth millions of pounds if expelled from Mughal territories. The crisis forced the English government to offer unprecedented rewards for Every's capture, while implementing new anti-piracy measures throughout its colonial territories. The international manhunt for Every and his associates revealed the extent to which pirate networks had penetrated legitimate colonial society. Several crew members were captured in American ports where they had attempted to dispose of their shares of the treasure through established merchant connections. The trials of these men provided detailed testimony about the organisation and methods of Red Sea pirates, offering colonial authorities their first comprehensive intelligence about the operational capabilities of Indian Ocean pirate crews. William Kidd's transformation from legitimate privateer to condemned pirate illustrated the complex legal and political forces that shaped the evolution of anti-piracy policies during this period. Kidd, a Scottish-born sea captain with extensive experience in legitimate maritime activities, received his commission in 1695 from a syndicate of prominent English politicians and merchants who sought to profit from anti-piracy operations while maintaining their respectable public positions. The Adventure Galley, Kidd's purpose-built vessel mounting 34 guns and carrying a crew of 155 men, represented one of the most ambitious attempts to combine private profit with public service in the suppression of piracy. The political backing that Kidd enjoyed included some of the most powerful figures in English society, including the Earl of Bellomont, who served as governor of both New York and Massachusetts, and several members of Parliament who had invested their own money in the expedition. These relationships provided Kidd with exceptional legal protection and political influence, while creating expectations for substantial returns on the investors' financial commitments. The contradiction between public anti-piracy rhetoric and private profit-seeking created ambiguities that would ultimately contribute to Kidd's downfall. Kidd's commission authorised him to attack pirates operating in the Indian Ocean, while also permitting captures of French vessels during the ongoing War of the League of Augsburg. However, the practical implementation of these instructions proved far more complicated than anticipated, as the distinction between legitimate prizes and piratical captures often depended on legal technicalities that were difficult to establish in distant waters. The absence of reliable communications with London meant that Kidd was forced to make crucial decisions without current information about diplomatic developments that might affect the legality of his actions. The deteriorating relationship between Kidd and his crew during the voyage to the Indian Ocean reflected the fundamental tensions inherent in his dual role as privateer and pirate hunter. The crew members who had signed aboard the Adventure Galley expected to share in the profits from captured vessels according to traditional privateer agreements, but Kidd's failure to locate suitable targets created frustration and demands for more aggressive action. The pressure to satisfy crew expectations while maintaining legal justification for his activities placed Kidd in an increasingly impossible position. The capture of the Quedagh merchant in January 1698 represented the decisive moment in Kidd's transformation from privateer to pirate in the eyes of English authorities. The large Armenian vessel, carrying a cargo of silk, calico, sugar, and other valuable goods worth approximately £70,000, sailed under French passes that provided legal justification for its capture under Kidd's commission. However, the ship's ownership by subjects of the Mughal Empire and its captain's English nationality created legal complications that would later be used to justify charges of piracy against Kidd. Kidd's decision to burn the Adventure Galley and transfer his operations to the captured Quedagh merchant reflected both practical necessities and strategic miscalculations that would contribute to his eventual downfall. The Adventure Galley had suffered extensive damage during its long voyage and required repairs that could not be completed in the remote locations where Kidd was operating. However, the transfer to a captured vessel created additional legal problems by eliminating the physical evidence of Kidd's legitimate commission while associating him more closely with piratical activities. The political climate that greeted Kidd's return to American waters in 1699 had changed dramatically during his 3-year absence. as the conclusion of the War of the League of Augsburg had eliminated the legal justification for attacking French shipping while increasing governmental pressure for aggressive anti-piracy measures. The Earl of Bellomont, Kidd's former patron, found himself politically vulnerable due to his association with piratical activities and determined to demonstrate his commitment to law enforcement by prosecuting his former protégé. Kidd's arrest in Boston in July 1699 marked the beginning of legal proceedings that would establish important precedents for the prosecution of piracy cases and the relationship between colonial and metropolitan authority in maritime law enforcement. The decision to transport Kidd to London for trial rather than prosecuting him in colonial courts reflected both the political significance of his case and the determination of English authorities to demonstrate their commitment to suppressing piracy through exemplary punishment. The trial of William Kidd in London during May 1701 became a public spectacle that attracted enormous attention throughout England and its colonies, as the proceedings involved not only questions of piracy and maritime law, but also broader issues of political corruption and governmental accountability. The prosecution's case relied heavily on testimony from former crew members who had been granted pardons in exchange for their cooperation, creating legal precedents that would influence piracy prosecutions for decades to come. Kidd's execution at Execution Dock on May 23, 1701, following his conviction on charges of piracy and murder, sent a clear message to the pirate community about the changing political environment surrounding maritime crime. The public nature of the execution, with Kidd's body subsequently displayed in chains at Tilbury Point as a warning to other mariners, represented a dramatic escalation in governmental efforts to deter piratical activities through exemplary punishment. The failure of the rope during Kidd's first hanging attempt, requiring a second execution, was interpreted by many observers as divine intervention, adding to the dramatic impact of the proceedings. The political consequences of Kidd's case extended far beyond his individual fate to encompass broader changes in colonial governance and anti-piracy policy. The scandal surrounding the involvement of prominent politicians in piratical enterprises led to increased oversight of colonial officials and more stringent requirements for accountability in the issuance of privateering commissions. These changes marked the beginning of a more systematic approach to piracy suppression that would ultimately contribute to the end of the golden age of piracy. The legislative response to the Kidd case included the passage of new anti-piracy laws that expanded the definition of piracy while streamlining prosecution procedures. The Act for the More Effectual Suppression of Piracy, passed by Parliament in 1700, established special admiralty courts in colonial territories with jurisdiction over piracy cases, eliminating the need for expensive transportation of defendants to London, while ensuring that trials would be conducted according to English legal standards rather than potentially sympathetic local customs. The maritime world of the early 18th century operated under rigid assumptions about gender roles that relegated women to supporting positions within coastal communities, while explicitly excluding them from the dangerous and lucrative business of seafaring. Naval regulations, merchant marine practices, and colonial laws all reinforced the notion that ships represented exclusively masculine domains, where women appeared only as passengers, captives, or occasional camp followers. Yet within the anarchic realm of Caribbean piracy, where traditional social hierarchies faced constant challenge and individual capability often mattered more than conventional propriety, exceptional women found opportunities to transcend these limitations and participate directly in the violent enterprise of maritime robbery. Anne Bonny emerged from the complex social landscape of colonial Carolina as perhaps the most notorious female pirate of the Golden Age, her life trajectory illustrating both the constraints imposed by 18th century gender expectations and the radical possibilities that piratical society offered to those bold enough to seize them. Born Anne Cormack around 1697 in County Cork, Ireland, she was the illegitimate daughter of William Cormack, a successful lawyer whose affair with his housemaid created a scandal that ultimately forced the family to emigrate to the American colonies. The circumstances of her birth and the social disruption it caused would prove formative in shaping Anne's rebellious character and her eventual rejection of conventional feminine roles. William Cormac's establishment of a plantation near Charleston provided Anne with a comfortable upbringing that included education and social advantages typically reserved for legitimate children of the colonial elite. However, her father's attempts to arrange a suitable marriage for her encountered fierce resistance from a young woman who had inherited both his strong will and his contempt for social conventions. Anne's violent rejection of her father's matrimonial plans, which reportedly included physical confrontations with unwanted suitors, demonstrated the fierce independence that would later serve her well in the dangerous world of piracy. Her marriage to James Bonney, a small-time sailor and occasional pirate, represented both an act of rebellion against her father's authority and a strategic alliance with someone who could provide access to the maritime networks that fascinated her. James Bonney's connections to the pirate community in Nassau offered Anne her first glimpse of a world where traditional gender roles held less sway and where individual courage and skill could earn respect regardless of one's sex. The marriage also provided her with the legal protection of her husband's name, while giving her the freedom to pursue interests that would have been scandalous for an unmarried woman. The couple's arrival in Nassau around 1718 coincided with the Pirate Republic's golden period, when the settlement served as headquarters for hundreds of pirates operating throughout the Caribbean. Anne's introduction to this lawless community revealed opportunities for female participation that extended far beyond the conventional roles of tavern keeper or merchant. While most women in Nassau supported piratical activities through provision of services, intelligence gathering, or financial backing, a few exceptional individuals participated directly in maritime expeditions as full members of pirate crews. Anne's relationship with John Calico Jack Rackham began as a typical liaison between a pirate captain and a local woman, but evolved into a genuine partnership that challenged conventional assumptions about women's capabilities in maritime warfare. Rackham, who had gained his nickname from his preference for brightly coloured calico clothing, commanded a sloop with a crew of approximately 20 men and had established a reputation for successful raids against small merchant vessels operating between Jamaica and the North American mainland. His willingness to accept Anne as a full member of his crew, rather than merely a passenger or camp follower, demonstrated both his recognition of her abilities and his understanding of the practical advantages that her participation could provide. Anne's integration into Rackham's crew required her to master the complex skills necessary for effective piratical operations, including seamanship, navigation, weapons handling, and the specialized techniques of ship-to-ship combat. Contemporary accounts suggest that she proved remarkably adept at these traditionally masculine pursuits, demonstrating both the physical courage required for boarding actions and the tactical intelligence necessary for successful prize-taking. Her participation in combat operations challenged the assumptions of both allies and enemies about women's capabilities in violent confrontations. The practical advantages of having women aboard pirate vessels extended beyond their individual combat contributions to include strategic benefits that enhanced the crew's operational effectiveness. Female pirates could serve as intelligence agents in ports where their presence attracted less suspicion than that of obviously piratical male sailors. They could also participate in deception tactics that relied on the assumption that merchant vessels carrying women passengers posed no threat to potential victims. These capabilities made women valuable assets for pirate crews willing to challenge conventional gender restrictions. Mary Read's extraordinary life trajectory illustrates even more dramatically the lengths to which some women went to escape the limitations imposed by their gender in 18th century society. Born in London around 1690 to a woman whose husband had died at sea, Mary's early childhood was shaped by economic desperation that forced her mother to devise elaborate deceptions to secure financial support from her deceased husband's family. The decision to disguise Mary as her dead brother Mark, who had died in infancy, allowed the family to continue receiving support payments while establishing a pattern of gender deception that would define Mary's entire adult life. The success of this childhood masquerade convinced Mary that masculine identity offered opportunities unavailable to women in legitimate society. Her physical appearance, including her height, build, and facial features, apparently made the deception relatively easy to maintain, while her natural inclination toward activities considered inappropriate for women reinforced the effectiveness of her male persona. The psychological impact of spending her formative years presenting herself as male undoubtedly influenced her later comfort with traditionally masculine pursuits, including military service and maritime adventure. Mary's enlistment in the English army during the War of Spanish Succession provided her with military training and combat experience that few women of her generation possessed. Serving as a foot soldier in Flanders, she participated in several major battles, including the Siege of Namur, and demonstrated the physical courage and tactical competence that earned respect from her male colleagues. Her ability to maintain her masculine disguise while enduring the harsh conditions of military campaigning testified to both her determination and her skill at gender performance. The revelation of Mary's true sex to a fellow soldier with whom she'd fallen in love created a crisis that threatened to expose her deception, while also providing her with new possibilities for conventional feminine life. Her marriage to this soldier and their subsequent establishment of a tavern near Breda seemed to offer the prospect of settling into traditional gender roles after years of masculine masquerade. However, her husband's death shortly after their marriage eliminated this possibility and forced Mary to resume her male identity to survive economically. Mary's transition from military service to maritime employment reflected both practical necessity and her recognition that seafaring offered opportunities for advancement that were unavailable in other occupations. Her enlistment aboard a merchant vessel bound for the West Indies provided her with the nautical skills that would prove essential for her later piratical career, while her continued success at maintaining masculine identity demonstrated her mastery of the complex performance required to function effectively in all-male environments. The capture of Mary's merchant vessel by pirates operating from Nassau presented her with an unexpected opportunity to join a community where her military experience and maritime skills would be valued regardless of her biological sex. Her decision to volunteer for pirate service rather than seeking passage to a safe port reflected both her attraction to the adventurous life that piracy offered and her recognition that piratical society provided more opportunities for individual advancement than legitimate employment. The democratic principles governing most pirate crews meant that her contributions would be evaluated based on performance rather than social background or gender conformity. Mary's service aboard various pirate vessels before joining Rackham's crew provided her with comprehensive experience in all aspects of piratical operations, from ship handling and navigation to combat tactics and prize distribution. Her reputation for courage and competence earned her the respect of male colleagues who remained unaware of her biological sex, demonstrating that gender restrictions in piratical society resulted more from assumption than from practical limitations. Her success at maintaining her masculine persona while participating in the most dangerous aspects of piratical life illustrated the possibilities available to women willing and able to challenge conventional gender boundaries. The convergence of Anne Bonny and Mary Red aboard Rackham's sloop in 1720 created an unprecedented situation in the history of piracy, as two women found themselves serving together in a pirate crew while maintaining very different relationships to their gender identity. Anne operated openly as a woman who had chosen to participate in traditionally masculine activities, while Mary continued her lifelong masquerade as a male crew member. Their initial interactions were complicated by Anne's romantic interest in the person she believed to be an attractive young man, leading to tensions that threatened crew unity until Mary's revelation of her true sex resolved the misunderstanding. The partnership that developed between Anne and Mary represented a unique alliance that combined their different approaches to challenging gender restrictions with their shared commitment to the piratical life. Anne's open defiance of feminine conventions complemented Mary's complete adoption of masculine identity, creating a formidable team that could adapt their strategies to different tactical situations. Their collaboration demonstrated the potential for women to support each other in transcending traditional limitations while pursuing dangerous and unconventional careers. The legal challenges faced by female pirates reflected the broader confusion that gender nonconformity created within 18th century judicial systems designed to process male criminals according to established precedents. When colonial authorities captured Rackham's crew in Jamaican waters in October 1720, they found themselves confronting legal questions that had no clear precedents in maritime law. The prosecution of Anne Bonny and Mary Read required courts to determine whether women could be held equally accountable with men for piratical crimes, and whether their gender provided any mitigating circumstances that should influence their sentences. The trial proceedings that began in Spanish Town, Jamaica, on November 16, 1720, attracted enormous public attention throughout the Caribbean as colonial society grappled with the spectacle of women accused of the traditionally masculine crime of piracy. The prosecution's case relied heavily on testimony from merchants and sailors who had encountered Rackham's crew during their piratical activities, with several witnesses specifically noting the active participation of both women in combat operations. These accounts challenged conventional assumptions about feminine nature while providing legal evidence of the defendant's criminal activities. Contemporary trial records reveal that both Anne and Mary conducted themselves with remarkable composure during the legal proceedings, refusing to express remorse for their actions while maintaining their innocence of the specific charges brought against them. Their behaviour in court reflected the same defiance of conventional feminine submissiveness that had characterised their piratical careers, demonstrating that their rejection of traditional gender roles extended beyond maritime activities to encompass their entire approach to social interaction. The question of pregnancy as potential legal protection emerged as a crucial factor in the cases of both women, reflecting 18th century legal traditions that prohibited the execution of pregnant women regardless of their crimes. Both Anne and Mary claimed to be pregnant when sentence was pronounced, a development that created additional legal complications while potentially saving their lives. The court's decision to postpone their executions, pending verification of their conditions, illustrated the complex intersection of gender, law, and medical knowledge in colonial judicial proceedings. Mary Read's death in prison before her pregnancy could be verified eliminated one source of legal uncertainty while depriving historians of the opportunity to observe how colonial society might have dealt with a female pirate who survived to face the full consequences of her actions. Her death from fever in Spanish Town Jail in April 1721 ended the remarkable career of a woman who had successfully challenged gender restrictions for over 30 years while participating in some of the most dangerous occupations available to people of her generation. Anne Bonny's mysterious disappearance from historical records following her trial has generated centuries of speculation about her ultimate fate and the extent to which colonial authorities were willing to execute women for piratical crimes. Some contemporary accounts suggest that her father's wealth and political connections secured her release from prison, while others claim that she died in captivity like her companion. The absence of definitive records regarding her execution or release reflects both the incomplete nature of colonial record-keeping and the unusual circumstances surrounding the prosecution of female pirates. The broader participation of women in pirate communities extended far beyond the exceptional cases of Anne Bonny and Mary Read, to encompass a wide range of supporting roles that were essential to the success of piratical enterprises. Women served as intelligence agents, financial backers, suppliers of provisions and equipment, and operators of safe houses where pirates could hide from pursuing authorities. These activities required courage, discretion, and business acumen that challenged conventional assumptions about feminine capabilities while remaining within more acceptable bounds of gender-appropriate behaviour. The pirate settlements that developed in places like Nassau, Madagascar, and various Caribbean islands created opportunities for women to establish independent economic enterprises that catered to the needs of visiting pirate crews. Female tavern keepers, merchants, and brothel operators often accumulated substantial wealth through their business relationships with successful pirates, demonstrating that entrepreneurial women could profit from piratical activities without directly participating in maritime violence. These economic relationships created networks of mutual dependence that strengthened pirate communities while providing women with unprecedented opportunities for financial independence. The romantic relationships that developed between pirates and women in pirate-friendly settlements created additional dimensions of female participation in piratical society that influenced both individual careers and broader community dynamics. Some women accompanied their pirate partners on voyages as passengers or informal crew members, while others remained ashore to manage business affairs and maintain safe havens for returning expeditions. These relationships often involved complex negotiations about gender roles, personal autonomy, and shared responsibility that reflected the unique social conditions existing within pirate communities. The presence of women in pirate settlements also created opportunities for the development of family structures that challenged conventional assumptions about domestic life in criminal communities. Children born to pirates and their female partners grew up in environments where traditional gender roles were constantly questioned and where economic success often depended on individual capability rather than social conformity. These alternative family arrangements provided models for social organisation that differed dramatically from those prevailing in legitimate colonial society. The documentation of women's roles in pirate communities remains fragmentary due to both the illegal nature of piratical activities and the tendency of contemporary chroniclers to focus on the most dramatic aspects of maritime violence, rather than the supporting networks that made such activities possible. The survival of detailed accounts concerning Anne Bonny and Mary Rad reflects the exceptional nature of their direct participation in combat operations, rather than the typical experience of women associated with pirate communities. This documentary bias has undoubtedly obscured the contributions of countless women who supported piratical enterprises through less spectacular but equally important activities. The international character of Caribbean pirate communities created opportunities for women from diverse cultural backgrounds to participate in piratical society according to different traditions regarding gender roles and feminine capabilities. Spanish, French, Dutch and African women brought varying expectations about appropriate feminine behaviour that enriched the cultural complexity of pirate settlements while providing alternative models for gender performance. These cultural exchanges created hybrid social arrangements that combined elements from multiple traditions while adapting to the unique requirements of piratical life. The economic independence that successful participation in pirate-related activities could provide offered women alternatives to the limited options typically available in colonial society, where marriage, domestic service, or marginal commercial activities represented the primary means of female survival. Women who accumulated wealth through piratical connections could achieve levels of economic autonomy that were virtually impossible to attain through legitimate means, creating incentives for continued involvement in illegal activities despite the obvious risks involved. The escalating audacity of pirate operations throughout the Caribbean had by 1716 reached levels that threatened the fundamental economic structures upon which European colonial empires depended. The systematic disruption of trade routes, the establishment of autonomous pirate republics, and the growing international incidents caused by attacks on vessels from multiple nations created pressures that forced metropolitan governments to abandon their previous tolerance for maritime lawlessness. The transformation of piracy from a useful tool of colonial policy into an existential threat to imperial commerce demanded unprecedented coordination between competing European powers and the deployment of resources on a scale never before committed to anti-piracy operations. The appointment of Woodes Rogers as governor of the Bahamas in January 1718 represented the culmination of years of planning by English colonial administrators who recognised that conventional approaches to piracy suppression had proven inadequate to address the scale and sophistication of the Nassau-based pirate confederation. Rogers, a former privateer captain who had gained fame through his circumnavigation of the globe between 1708 and 1711, possessed both the maritime expertise necessary to understand pirate tactics and the political connections required to secure the substantial resources needed for a comprehensive campaign against the pirate stronghold. Rogers' background as captain of the Duke and Duchess during their successful privateering voyage around Cape Horn provided him with first-hand experience of the challenges involved in long-range naval operations and the complexities of managing diverse crews under difficult conditions. His rescue of Alexander Selkirk from Juan Fernandez Island had made him a celebrity in English society, while demonstrating his capability for executing complex operations in remote locations. These qualifications, combined with his demonstrated loyalty to the Crown and his understanding of colonial administration, made him an ideal candidate for the dangerous mission of establishing governmental authority over the lawless Bahamian archipelago. The financial arrangements that supported Rogers' expedition illustrated the extent to which the English government was willing to invest in anti-piracy operations. The initial funding of £11,000 provided by the Crown was supplemented by additional investments from private merchants who recognised that the elimination of pirate threats was essential for the protection of their commercial interests. This public-private partnership created a sustainable funding model that could support extended operations while ensuring that the costs of piracy suppression were shared between governmental and commercial interests. Rogers' fleet, consisting of 3 warships and several supply vessels carrying a total force of over 100 soldiers and 250 colonists, represented the largest military expedition ever mounted against a pirate stronghold. The flagship HMS Delicia, mounting 24 guns, provided the firepower necessary to challenge any pirate vessels that might attempt to resist the establishment of governmental authority, while the supporting vessels carried the supplies and personnel required to establish a permanent colonial administration. The inclusion of families among the colonists demonstrated the government's commitment to creating a legitimate settlement that could provide long-term stability rather than merely a temporary military occupation. The intelligence gathering that preceded Rogers' expedition provided detailed information about the defensive capabilities and internal dynamics of the Nassau pirate community. Colonial agents operating throughout the Caribbean had compiled comprehensive reports on the number and armament of pirate vessels based at Nassau, the leadership structure of the pirate confederation, and the commercial networks that supported pirate operations. This intelligence enabled Rogers to develop tactical plans that exploited weaknesses in pirate defences while avoiding unnecessary confrontations that might result in heavy casualties among his forces. Rogers' arrival at Nassau on July 26, 1718, created an immediate crisis for the pirate community as hundreds of pirates found themselves confronted with the choice between submission to governmental authority or resistance that would likely result in their destruction. The sight of Rogers' fleet entering Nassau harbour demonstrated both the government's capability to project military power into previously secure pirate territories and its determination to eliminate pirate operations regardless of the costs involved. The psychological impact of this display of force proved as important as its military significance in convincing many pirates that continued resistance was futile. The systematic approach that Rogers adopted for dismantling the pirate infrastructure at Nassau reflected his understanding that military victory alone would be insufficient to prevent the re-establishment of pirate operations. His immediate priorities included securing the harbour through the construction of additional fortifications, establishing control over the supply networks that supported pirate activities, and creating alternative economic opportunities for former pirates willing to abandon their criminal careers. These comprehensive measures addressed both the immediate military threat posed by armed pirates and the underlying economic conditions that made piracy attractive to unemployed sailors. The construction of Fort Nassau under Rogers' direction transformed the strategic balance of power in the Bahamas by providing governmental forces with a permanent base capable of controlling access to the harbour while serving as a symbol of legitimate authority. The fort's design, featuring thick walls and strategically positioned cannon emplacements, reflected the latest developments in military engineering while adapting to the specific defensive requirements created by Nassau's unique geography. The employment of former pirates in the construction work provided them with legitimate income while ensuring that their specialised knowledge of local conditions contributed to the fort's effectiveness. The King's Pardon, proclaimed by George I on September 5, 1717, and implemented by Rogers upon his arrival in Nassau, represented an unprecedented attempt to resolve the piracy crisis through negotiation rather than military force alone. The terms of the pardon offered complete forgiveness for all piratical acts committed before January 5, 1718, in exchange for the surrender of pirate vessels and the acceptance of governmental authority. This policy reflected the recognition that military action alone could not address the scale of the piracy problem, particularly given the international character of pirate crews and the limited resources available for extended military campaigns. The implementation of the royal pardon created complex legal and administrative challenges as colonial officials attempted to verify the identities and previous activities of hundreds of individuals claiming eligibility for forgiveness. The process required careful investigation to distinguish between genuine pirates seeking rehabilitation and criminals attempting to exploit the pardon to escape punishment for other offences. The administrative burden of processing pardon applications strained the limited bureaucratic resources available to colonial governments while creating opportunities for fraud and abuse. The mixed success of the pardon policy reflected the diverse motivations and circumstances of individual pirates who faced the choice between surrender and continued resistance. Approximately 300 pirates accepted the terms of the pardon during Rogers' first months as governor, representing a significant portion of the Nassau-based pirate population. These men included both ordinary crew members seeking escape from the dangers of piratical life and experienced captains who recognized that changing political conditions made continued piracy increasingly risky and unprofitable. Benjamin Hornigold's acceptance of the royal pardon and his subsequent employment as a pirate hunter illustrated the potential for successful rehabilitation of former pirates who possessed valuable skills and local knowledge. Hornigold's intimate familiarity with pirate tactics, hideouts, and personnel made him an invaluable asset for governmental forces seeking to locate and capture pirates who had rejected the pardon offer. His transformation from pirate leader to government agent demonstrated both the pragmatic flexibility that characterized colonial administration and the complex loyalties that existed within pirate communities. The resistance mounted by pirates who rejected the pardon offer revealed the limitations of negotiated solutions to the piracy problem, while highlighting the determination of hardcore criminals to maintain their independence from governmental authority. Edward Teach's continued operations from North Carolina bases, Charles Vane's attacks on shipping near Nassau, and the activities of other pirate leaders who refused to surrender created ongoing security threats that required military responses. The persistence of these holdout groups demonstrated that comprehensive piracy suppression would require sustained military pressure in addition to negotiated settlements. The naval expeditions mounted against remaining pirate strongholds represented the military component of the comprehensive anti-piracy strategy developed by colonial governments during this period. These operations required unprecedented coordination between different colonial administrations and naval commands, as pirates had established bases throughout the Caribbean and along the North American coast that could only be eliminated through simultaneous attacks. The logistical challenges involved in coordinating such extensive operations tested the administrative capabilities of colonial governments while demonstrating their commitment to eliminating pirate threats. Lieutenant Robert Maynard's pursuit of Edward Teach represented the most dramatic and successful of these naval expeditions, combining careful intelligence gathering with tactical innovation to eliminate the most feared pirate captain of his generation. Maynard's command of two small sloops, the Jane and the Ranger, reflected the recognition that hunting pirates required vessels capable of operating in the shallow waters where pirates typically sought refuge. The shallow drafts and maneuverability of these vessels provided crucial advantages in the confined waters of Ocracoke Inlet, where Teach had established his final stronghold. The intelligence that guided Maynard's expedition came from multiple sources, including former pirates who had accepted the royal pardon, merchants who had been robbed by Teach's crew, and colonial officials who had monitored his movements along the North Carolina coast. This comprehensive intelligence network enabled Maynard to locate Teach's position with precision while understanding the tactical situation he would face during the anticipated confrontation. The quality of this intelligence proved crucial to the success of the operation, as Teach's intimate knowledge of local waters would have made him nearly impossible to locate without accurate information about his whereabouts. The battle that occurred in Ocracoke Inlet on November 22, 1718, demonstrated both the tactical skills that had made Teach such a formidable opponent and the advantages that superior numbers and preparation could provide to well-led governmental forces. Teach's sloop Adventure, mounting 8 guns and carrying a crew of approximately 20 men, initially held tactical advantages due to its captain's superior knowledge of local navigation hazards and his crew's extensive combat experience. However, Maynard's careful positioning of his vessels and his innovative use of concealed boarders ultimately overcame these advantages through superior planning and execution. The hand-to-hand combat that decided the battle illustrated the personal courage required of naval officers who accepted assignments to hunt dangerous pirates in their own territory. Maynard's direct confrontation with Teach involved sword fighting and pistol dueling at close quarters, with both men suffering wounds before Teach finally succumbed to multiple injuries inflicted by Maynard and his crew. The death of Blackbeard in single combat with a Royal Navy officer provided a powerful symbol of governmental determination to eliminate pirate threats regardless of the personal risks involved. The aftermath of Teach's death created immediate practical and legal challenges as Maynard's forces attempted to secure evidence of the pirates' criminal activities while disposing of his crew according to established legal procedures. The decision to sever Teach's head and display it from the bowsprit of Maynard's vessel served both as proof of the pirate's death and as a warning to other criminals who might consider similar careers. This gruesome trophy became a powerful symbol throughout the Caribbean of the government's capability to eliminate even the most notorious pirates. The legal proceedings that followed the capture of Teach's surviving crew members established important precedents for the prosecution of piracy cases in colonial courts. The trials conducted in Williamsburg under the authority of the Special Admiralty Court established for Virginia demonstrated the streamlined procedures that had been developed to handle piracy cases more efficiently than traditional common law courts. The conviction and execution of several crew members provided additional deterrent effects while establishing the legal framework for future anti-piracy prosecutions. The destruction of other pirate bases throughout the Caribbean required similar combinations of intelligence gathering, tactical planning, and military execution, that tested the capabilities of colonial naval forces operating under challenging conditions. The elimination of pirate strongholds in the Bahamas, along the North Carolina coast, and in various Caribbean islands required sustained operations that stretched colonial resources while demonstrating governmental commitment to comprehensive piracy suppression. These campaigns succeeded in eliminating most major pirate bases while forcing surviving pirates to operate as isolated individuals rather than organized communities. The coordinated international efforts that emerged during this period represented unprecedented cooperation between European colonial powers that had traditionally viewed each other as rivals rather than allies. The recognition that piracy threatened the commercial interests of all European nations created incentives for collaboration that overcame traditional diplomatic obstacles. Spanish, French, English, and Dutch colonial administrators shared intelligence about pirate movements while coordinating naval patrols and supporting each other's anti-piracy operations. The expansion of Admiralty Court jurisdiction represented a crucial legal development that streamlined the prosecution of piracy cases while ensuring that trials would be conducted according to consistent legal standards throughout the colonial world. The establishment of special admiralty courts in major colonial ports eliminated the need for expensive transportation of defendants to metropolitan centres, while providing colonial officials with the legal authority necessary to process large numbers of piracy cases efficiently. These courts operated under simplified procedures that reduced the time and expense required for prosecutions, while maintaining adequate protections for defendants' rights. The use of captured pirates as witnesses against their former associates created both opportunities and challenges for colonial prosecutors seeking to build strong cases against pirate leaders. The testimony of former pirates who had accepted pardons or negotiated plea agreements provided crucial evidence about pirate organization, tactics, and criminal activities that would otherwise have been difficult to obtain. However, the reliability of such testimony remained questionable given the obvious incentives for witnesses to exaggerate their former associates' crimes while minimizing their own involvement. The establishment of precedents for piracy trials during this period created a body of legal doctrine that would influence maritime law enforcement for generations. The decisions rendered by colonial admiralty courts addressed complex questions about the definition of piracy, the territorial jurisdiction of different courts, and the procedures appropriate for handling cases involving international crews operating in multiple jurisdictions. These precedents provided guidance for future prosecutors, while establishing legal frameworks that could accommodate the unique challenges presented by maritime crime. The financial costs associated with comprehensive anti-piracy operations strained colonial budgets, while demonstrating the economic impact that piracy had created through its disruption of legitimate commerce. The expenses involved in maintaining naval patrols, constructing fortifications, and prosecuting captured pirates required substantial investments by colonial governments that were already struggling with limited revenues and competing priorities. However, the restoration of secure shipping lanes and the resumption of normal commercial activities ultimately justified these expenditures through increased tax revenues and economic growth. The human costs of the anti-piracy campaigns included not only the pirates who were killed or executed, but also the naval personnel and colonial officials who lost their lives in the dangerous work of hunting armed criminals in remote locations. The casualties suffered by governmental forces during operations against pirate strongholds demonstrated both the determination of pirates to resist capture and the courage required of those who accepted the responsibility for eliminating pirate threats. These sacrifices contributed to the eventual success of anti-piracy operations, while highlighting the serious nature of the challenge that piracy had presented to colonial authority. The gradual success of governmental anti-piracy efforts created new challenges as former pirates sought legitimate employment in colonial societies that remained suspicious of their backgrounds and motivations. the integration of pardoned pirates into colonial communities required careful monitoring to ensure that they did not return to criminal activities while providing them with economic opportunities that made legitimate employment more attractive than piracy. The success of these rehabilitation efforts varied considerably depending on local economic conditions and the willingness of colonial communities to accept former criminals as productive members of society. The systematic dismantling of pirate strongholds and the successful implementation of royal pardons had by 1720 eliminated the organised pirate confederations that had terrorised Caribbean shipping for over a decade. Yet even as Nassau fell under governmental control and other major pirate bases succumbed to military pressure, individual captains of exceptional skill and determination continue to operate with devastating effectiveness against merchant shipping. These final practitioners of the piratical arts represented the culmination of decades of tactical innovation and organisational refinement, wielding capabilities that far exceeded those of their predecessors, while facing increasingly sophisticated and coordinated opposition from colonial and metropolitan authorities. Bartholomew Roberts emerged from this crucible of intensifying governmental pressure to establish himself as the most successful and systematically destructive pirate captain in recorded history. His transformation from a reluctant recruit to supreme commander of the largest pirate fleet ever assembled demonstrated both the continuing appeal of piratical life to skilled mariners and the extraordinary individual capabilities required to succeed in an increasingly hostile environment. Roberts's methodical approach to maritime warfare combined traditional pirate tactics with innovations in fleet coordination and intelligence gathering that enabled him to maintain effective operations even as governmental forces eliminated his competitors and destroyed their bases. Roberts' final campaigns along the West African coast between 1720 and 1722 represented the apex of piratical achievement, as his fleet of 4 vessels systematically devastated the slave trade and legitimate commerce throughout the region. The Royal Fortune, his flagship mounting 40 guns and carrying a crew of 157 men, served as the command centre for operations that extended from the Gold Coast to the Bight of Benin. Supporting vessels included the Good Fortune with 20 guns, the Ranger with 16 guns, and a captured sloop that provided reconnaissance and pursuit capabilities for the main battle fleet. This concentration of naval power enabled Roberts to challenge even heavily defended slave ships and merchant convoys that would have been beyond the reach of smaller pirate crews. The systematic nature of Roberts' operations reflected his understanding that sustained success required careful planning and precise execution rather than the opportunistic raiding that characterized less sophisticated pirate captains. His intelligence networks provided detailed information about slave ship departures from European ports, the sailing schedules of West African trading vessels, and the defensive capabilities of various coastal settlements. This comprehensive intelligence enabled Roberts to position his fleet advantageously while avoiding confrontations with superior enemy forces that might threaten his operational effectiveness. Roberts' attack on the slave ship Onslow in June 1721 demonstrated the tactical sophistication that distinguished his operations from those of conventional pirates. The Onslow, a heavily armed vessel mounting 28 guns and carrying a crew of 70 men, represented one of the most formidable opponents that any pirate captain had ever attempted to capture. Roberts's approach involved careful coordination between his different vessels, with the Royal Fortune engaging the slave ship's attention while the Good Fortune and Ranger manoeuvred to attack from different angles simultaneously. This coordinated assault overwhelmed the Onslow's defences while minimising casualties among Roberts's crews. The capture of 11 slave ships at Cape Coast Castle in January 1722 represented perhaps the most audacious single operation ever attempted by a pirate fleet. Roberts' assault on the heavily fortified British trading post required precise timing and coordination between his vessels as they approached the anchorage, where the slave ships lay at anchor under the protection of the castle's guns. The operation succeeded through Roberts' innovative use of captured vessels as fireships, creating confusion among the defenders while his main force swept down on the anchored ships. The destruction of property worth over £50,000 in a single day demonstrated the continuing vulnerability of European colonial commerce to determined pirate attacks. Roberts' organisational innovations extended beyond tactical coordination to encompass comprehensive systems for crew management and fleet administration that enabled him to maintain discipline and effectiveness among nearly 500 men operating across multiple vessels. His Articles of Agreement established detailed procedures for profit distribution, disciplinary enforcement, and command succession that prevented the internal conflicts that had destroyed other large pirate confederations. The democratic principles embedded in these articles attracted skilled mariners who valued equitable treatment while ensuring that Roberts retained the authority necessary for effective military command. The international composition of Roberts's crews reflected the global scope of his recruitment efforts and his willingness to accept capable men regardless of their national or racial backgrounds. English sailors formed the largest single group, but substantial numbers of French, Portuguese, Dutch, and African pirates participated in his expeditions. Former slaves who had escaped from plantations or been liberated from captured slave ships served alongside European deserters and colonial refugees, creating a cosmopolitan community that challenged conventional social hierarchies while maintaining the unity necessary for successful operations. Roberts' personal leadership style combined the democratic consultation required by pirate articles with the decisive authority necessary for effective military command. His reputation for fairness in distributing captured wealth and his willingness to share the dangers of combat operations earned him the loyalty of crews who recognized that their individual success depended on collective effectiveness. Contemporary accounts describe Roberts as a charismatic figure who could inspire men to extraordinary efforts while maintaining the discipline necessary for complex fleet manoeuvres. The death of Bartholomew Roberts on February 10, 1722, during the battle with HMS Swallow off Cape Lopez, marked the end of the golden age of piracy as definitively as any single event could. Captain Challoner Ogle's pursuit of Roberts's fleet represented the culmination of years of planning by Royal Navy commanders who recognised that eliminating Roberts was essential for restoring security to West African shipping lanes. The Swallow, a fourth-rate ship of the line mounting 50 guns, possessed the firepower necessary to challenge Roberts's flagship in direct combat while maintaining the speed required to pursue fleeing pirate vessels. The tactical circumstances that led to Roberts' death illustrated both his exceptional capabilities as a naval commander and the ultimate limitations faced by even the most skilled pirates when confronted by superior governmental forces. Roberts had divided his fleet to maximise his operational effectiveness, with the Royal Fortune and Good Fortune operating together, while the Ranger and the captured sloop pursued separate targets. This division of force, while tactically sound for normal operations, left Roberts vulnerable when Ogle's squadron appeared unexpectedly off Cape Lopez. Roberts's decision to engage the Swallow in direct combat rather than attempting to escape reflected both his confidence in his vessel's capabilities and his recognition that flight might expose his entire fleet to destruction. The Royal Fortune's 40 guns provided substantial firepower, while Roberts' crew of experienced pirates possessed superior gunnery skills compared to many Royal Navy crews. However, the Swallow's heavier construction and larger crew ultimately proved decisive advantages in the prolonged artillery duel that followed. The grape shot that killed Roberts as he stood on his quarterdeck directing the battle struck him in the throat, causing immediate death and creating panic among his crew, who had never contemplated the possibility of their seemingly invincible captain's mortality. Roberts's body, dressed in his finest crimson damask waistcoat and red feather, was immediately thrown overboard according to his own instructions to prevent its capture by enemy forces. This final gesture reflected both his pride and his understanding of the symbolic importance that his death would hold for governmental authorities seeking to demonstrate their victory over piracy. The surrender of the royal fortune following Roberts's death marked the beginning of legal proceedings that would establish important precedents for the prosecution of piracy cases and demonstrate the government's determination to use exemplary punishment as a deterrent to future maritime crime. The capture of 254 pirates from Roberts's fleet created logistical challenges for colonial authorities who lacked adequate facilities for housing such large numbers of prisoners while conducting the complex legal proceedings required for their prosecution. The trials that began at Cape Coast Castle in March 1722 under the jurisdiction of a special admiralty court represented the largest piracy prosecution in colonial history. The proceedings involved detailed testimony from captured pirates, examination of evidence recovered from Roberts's vessels, and complex legal arguments about the jurisdiction of colonial courts over crimes committed in international waters. The systematic nature of these trials reflected the government's determination to establish legal precedents that would support future anti-piracy prosecutions while ensuring that the proceedings met contemporary standards of judicial fairness. The execution of 54 pirates from Roberts' crew at Cape Coast Castle between April and November 1722 provided a dramatic demonstration of governmental power that reverberated throughout the Atlantic world. The public nature of these executions, conducted before assembled crowds that included local African rulers, European merchants and colonial officials, served both as punishment for the condemned men and as warning to potential pirates who might consider similar careers. The systematic execution of so many pirates over such an extended period created a sustained campaign of deterrence that contributed significantly to the decline of piratical activity. The transportation of surviving crew members to various colonial ports for additional trials and punishments extended the legal proceedings while ensuring that news of Roberts's defeat and the fate of his followers reached pirate communities throughout the Caribbean and North America. The sentences imposed on these men ranged from execution for the most culpable leaders to transportation and imprisonment for ordinary crew members who could demonstrate that they had been forced into piratical service. These varied punishments reflected both the government's desire for comprehensive deterrence and its recognition that different levels of culpability required different responses. The gradual elimination of remaining pirate havens proceeded systematically as governmental forces applied the lessons learned from successful operations against major strongholds like Nassau and the destruction of organised fleets like Roberts. The transformation of Nassau from pirate republic to legitimate colonial settlement demonstrated that even the most notorious pirate bases could be converted to governmental control through appropriate combinations of military force, economic incentives, and administrative competence. The success of Woodes Rogers' governorship provided a model that could be adapted to other problematic locations throughout the Caribbean. The suppression of Madagascar settlements required different approaches due to the island's distance from major colonial centres and the complex political relationships that existed between pirate communities and local African rulers. The gradual decline of these settlements resulted more from changing economic conditions and the elimination of pirate fleets that had supported them than from direct military action. As fewer pirates arrived with captured goods to trade, the commercial networks that had sustained Madagascar pirate communities gradually collapsed, forcing inhabitants to seek alternative means of survival. The end of safe harbours for pirates created cascading effects throughout the Caribbean, as former pirate havens either fell under governmental control or became too dangerous for continued piratical use. Ports that had previously welcomed pirates with minimal questions about the origins of their wealth began implementing stricter controls over shipping and commerce as colonial authorities increased their oversight of maritime activities. These changes forced remaining pirates to operate with greater secrecy, while limiting their access to the supplies and services necessary for sustained operations. The final resistance mounted by isolated pirate crews demonstrated both the desperation of men who had few alternatives to criminal careers and the declining effectiveness of piratical tactics against increasingly sophisticated governmental countermeasures. These last pirates typically operated single vessels with small crews, lacking the organizational support and strategic coordination that had enabled earlier pirate confederations to challenge colonial authority effectively. Their activities consisted primarily of opportunistic attacks on weakly defended merchant vessels, rather than the systematic campaigns that had characterized the golden age of piracy. Edward Lowe's career between 1721 and 1724 exemplified both the continuing appeal of piratical life to certain types of individuals and the ultimate futility of attempting to maintain traditional pirate operations in the changed political environment of the 1720s. Lowe, whose background included service aboard legitimate merchant vessels and experience in the Jamaican logwood trade, possessed the maritime skills necessary for successful pirate operations. However, his inability to establish secure bases or maintain large crews limited his effectiveness, while exposing him to constant pursuit by governmental forces. Lowe's reputation for exceptional cruelty, including the torture and murder of captured merchants and sailors, reflected both his personal sadistic tendencies and his recognition that fear remained one of the few weapons available to pirates who lacked the numerical strength to overcome resistance through conventional means. His practice of cutting off prisoners' ears, lips and noses served both to satisfy his violent impulses and to create terror among potential victims who might be more likely to surrender without resistance when faced with the prospect of such treatment. The international manhunt that eventually eliminated Lowe and his associates demonstrated the extent to which governmental authorities had developed their capabilities for tracking and capturing individual pirates operating without organizational support. Intelligence networks that had been established to monitor major pirate fleets proved equally effective at locating isolated crews, while naval patrols that had been organized to protect shipping lanes provided rapid response capabilities when pirate activities were detected. The systematic nature of these efforts ensured that even the most elusive pirates could not indefinitely avoid capture or destruction. The transition of remaining pirates to other forms of maritime crime reflected both the changing opportunities available in the Atlantic world and the adaptability of men who had acquired specialized skills through piratical experience. Some former pirates became smugglers, using their knowledge of secluded harbours and corrupt officials to facilitate illegal trade in goods that were subject to colonial taxation or prohibition. Others joined legitimate merchant crews or colonial navies, where their maritime expertise and combat experience made them valuable employees despite their criminal backgrounds. The transformation of piratical skills into legitimate occupations illustrated the extent to which the golden age of piracy had created a pool of experienced mariners whose capabilities exceeded those of conventionally trained sailors. Former pirates possessed comprehensive knowledge of Caribbean waters, familiarity with the latest naval tactics, and experience in managing diverse crews under difficult conditions. These skills proved valuable in legitimate maritime industries that were expanding rapidly as colonial economies recovered from the disruptions caused by piratical activities. The decline of piracy as an attractive career option resulted from the combination of increased risks and decreased opportunities that characterized the maritime environment of the 1720s. The systematic elimination of pirate bases removed the secure retreats that had been essential for successful operations, while improved naval patrols made it increasingly difficult to locate and capture suitable prizes without detection. The establishment of regular convoy systems for valuable shipping further reduced the availability of isolated targets that could be attacked without risking confrontation with superior forces. The economic factors that had originally attracted men to piratical careers gradually disappeared as colonial economies stabilized and legitimate employment opportunities expanded. The end of major European conflicts eliminated the large pool of unemployed military personnel who had provided recruitment sources for pirate crews, while growing colonial populations created increased demand for skilled mariners in legitimate occupations. The wages available in merchant service, while still modest by piratical standards, became more attractive as the risks associated with piracy increased dramatically. The social changes that accompanied the decline of piracy reflected broader transformations in colonial society, as governmental authority became more effective and traditional hierarchies reasserted themselves. The egalitarian principles that had characterized pirate communities found fewer outlets for expression as colonial administrations implemented stricter controls over social and economic activities. The opportunities for rapid advancement and democratic participation that had attracted men to piracy became increasingly rare in legitimate colonial society, but the risks associated with attempting to recreate them through illegal means had become prohibitively high. The legal precedents established through the prosecution of major pirate figures created a comprehensive framework for maritime law enforcement that would influence colonial administration for generations. The procedures developed for Admiralty court trials, the standards of evidence required for piracy convictions, and the range of punishments considered appropriate for different categories of maritime crime all reflected the lessons learned through years of experience with piratical prosecutions. These precedents provided colonial officials with the legal tools necessary to maintain order in maritime communities while ensuring that future challenges to governmental authority could be addressed through established judicial procedures. The international cooperation that had developed during the anti-piracy campaigns created lasting diplomatic relationships that transcended the immediate need for piracy suppression. Spanish, French, English, and Dutch colonial administrators who had collaborated in eliminating pirate threats recognized the benefits of continued cooperation in maintaining maritime security and protecting commercial interests. These relationships provided foundations for future collaborative efforts, while demonstrating that competing colonial powers could work together effectively when their fundamental interests aligned. The systematic elimination of the last independent pirate captains by 1730 created a power vacuum in former pirate strongholds that colonial administrators moved quickly to fill with legitimate governmental institutions and commercial enterprises. Nassau, which had served as the epicenter of Caribbean piracy for over a decade, underwent a remarkable transformation as Woodes Rogers and his successors implemented comprehensive programs to convert the lawless settlement into a productive colonial outpost. The harbour that had once sheltered hundreds of pirate vessels now accommodated merchant ships carrying legitimate cargo, while the taverns and warehouses that had catered to pirate crews were repurposed to serve the needs of law-abiding colonists. The physical reconstruction of Nassau required substantial investments in infrastructure that reflected the government's commitment to establishing permanent colonial presence in the Bahamas. Fort Nassau was expanded and reinforced with additional cannon emplacements and barracks facilities capable of housing a permanent garrison of 200 soldiers. New wharves and warehouses were constructed to accommodate the growing legitimate trade that replaced piratical commerce, while residential areas were laid out according to planned designs that imposed order on the previously chaotic settlement. The Anglican church that was erected in the town centre served both practical and symbolic functions, providing religious services for the colonial population while demonstrating the restoration of legitimate authority. The integration of former pirates into colonial society presented complex challenges that required careful balance between security concerns and economic necessities. Many pardoned pirates possessed valuable skills in seamanship, navigation, and maritime trades that were essential for the development of colonial economies. However, their criminal backgrounds created suspicions among legitimate colonists who feared that economic hardships might drive former pirates back to their previous occupations. Colonial administrators developed monitoring systems that tracked the activities of pardoned pirates, while providing them with economic opportunities that made legitimate employment more attractive than returning to crime. The success of these rehabilitation programs varied considerably depending on individual circumstances and local economic conditions. Former pirates who possessed marketable skills such as shipbuilding, navigation, or maritime trading often achieved successful integration into colonial society. Benjamin Hornigold's transformation from pirate leader to pirate hunter demonstrated the potential for complete rehabilitation when former criminals possessed abilities that served governmental interests. His knowledge of pirate tactics and hideouts proved invaluable for colonial authorities seeking to eliminate remaining criminal elements, while his acceptance of legitimate authority provided a powerful example for other former pirates considering similar transitions. The establishment of legitimate shipping services to replace the commercial networks that had previously supported piratical activities required coordination between colonial governments and private merchants who recognized new opportunities in formerly dangerous waters. Regular packet services were established between Nassau and major colonial ports, providing reliable transportation for passengers and cargo, while demonstrating that normal commercial activities could operate safely in areas that had previously been dominated by pirates. These services employed many former pirates as crew members, providing them with legitimate income while utilizing their specialized knowledge of Caribbean waters. The transformation of Madagascar from pirate haven to legitimate colonial territory proceeded more gradually due to the island's distance from major European colonial centers and the complex political relationships that existed between pirate communities and indigenous rulers. The decline of pirate activities had eliminated the primary source of European manufactured goods that had sustained trade relationships between pirates and Malagasy kingdoms. However, some former pirates remained on the island as traders and advisors to local rulers, creating hybrid communities that blended European and African cultural elements while maintaining connections to global commercial networks. The impact of piracy suppression on maritime law represented one of the most significant and lasting consequences of the anti-piracy campaigns. The legal precedents established through the prosecution of major pirate figures created comprehensive frameworks for defining maritime crimes and establishing jurisdictional authority over offences committed in international waters. The Act for the More Effectual Suppression of Piracy, passed by Parliament in 1700 and expanded through subsequent legislation, provided colonial admiralty courts with standardised procedures for handling piracy cases while ensuring that trials met contemporary standards of judicial fairness. These legal innovations extended beyond piracy prosecutions to encompass broader questions of maritime law and international relations. The establishment of uniform procedures for determining vessel nationality, cargo ownership, and crew status created foundations for resolving commercial disputes that had previously been subject to conflicting jurisdictional claims. The development of standardized documentation requirements for merchant vessels provided governmental authorities with tools for distinguishing between legitimate commerce and criminal activities, while facilitating the free flow of lawful trade. The international cooperation that had emerged during the anti-piracy campaigns created lasting diplomatic relationships that transcended the immediate need for piracy suppression. The Treaty of Madrid, signed in 1750, included specific provisions for continued collaboration in maritime law enforcement, while establishing protocols for sharing intelligence about suspicious shipping activities. Similar agreements between other European powers created networks of mutual assistance that enhanced the security of international commerce, while demonstrating that competing colonial empires could cooperate effectively when their fundamental interests aligned. The expansion of naval cooperation between European powers represented a particularly significant development that influenced maritime strategy for generations. Joint patrols were established in areas where piratical activities had been most problematic, with vessels from different nations sharing intelligence and coordinating their movements to maximize coverage while minimizing costs. These collaborative arrangements required the development of standardized signal systems and communication protocols that enabled ships from different navies to work together effectively, despite language barriers and varying tactical doctrines. The establishment of regular convoy systems represented the most visible change in maritime commerce resulting from the piracy experience. Merchant vessels travelling through areas that had previously been infested with pirates now sailed in organised formations protected by naval escorts, reducing their vulnerability to attack while enabling more efficient use of defensive resources. These convoy systems required substantial coordination between merchants, naval commanders, and colonial officials to establish sailing schedules, assign escort vessels, and manage the complex logistics involved in coordinating multiple ships with different speeds and destinations. The development of these protective measures stimulated innovations in ship design and naval technology that enhanced both defensive capabilities and operational efficiency. Merchant vessels were constructed with reinforced hulls and additional gun ports that enabled them to defend themselves more effectively against potential attackers. Naval vessels were designed with improved speed and maneuverability that allowed them to respond quickly to threats while maintaining station with slower merchant ships. The development of more reliable communication systems enabled convoy commanders to coordinate the movements of large numbers of vessels while maintaining security against potential threats. The economic consequences of the pirate era extended far beyond the immediate costs of suppression campaigns to encompass fundamental changes in trade patterns and commercial relationships throughout the Atlantic world. The disruption of traditional shipping routes during the height of piratical activity had forced merchants to develop alternative pathways that often proved more efficient than previous arrangements. The northern route through the Bahamas, which had been avoided during the period of pirate control, became a preferred passage for vessels travelling between Europe and North America, once governmental authority was established in Nassau. The concentration of anti-piracy efforts in certain areas led to the development of new commercial centres that served as secure bases for legitimate trade. Port Royal's decline following the earthquake of 1692 and subsequent pirate troubles had created opportunities for other Jamaican ports to assume greater importance in Caribbean commerce. Kingston emerged as the island's primary commercial centre, benefiting from its protected harbour and proximity to naval facilities that provided security against potential threats. Similar developments occurred throughout the Caribbean as merchants relocated their operations to ports that offered better protection from criminal activities. The insurance industry that had developed in response to piratical threats continued to evolve after the suppression of organised piracy, creating sophisticated risk assessment systems that influenced commercial decision-making throughout the Atlantic world. Lloyd's of London and other insurance companies had accumulated extensive data about shipping losses, weather patterns, and security conditions that enabled them to provide more accurate pricing for maritime risks. This information became valuable for merchants planning voyages and investors evaluating potential opportunities in colonial trade. The technological improvements stimulated by anti-piracy efforts had lasting impacts on naval warfare and maritime commerce that extended well beyond their original purposes. The development of faster, more maneuverable vessels for pirate hunting influenced the design of naval ships for generations, while innovations in gunnery and ship-to-ship combat tactics were incorporated into standard naval doctrine. The intelligence-gathering systems that had been created to track pirate movements provided models for military and commercial intelligence operations that proved valuable in subsequent conflicts and commercial competitions. The social changes that accompanied the end of the pirate era reflected broader transformations in colonial society as governmental authority became more effective and traditional hierarchies reasserted themselves. The egalitarian principles that had characterized pirate communities found limited expression in legitimate colonial society, where established social structures provided fewer opportunities for rapid advancement or democratic participation. However, The example of pirate democracy influenced political developments in some colonial communities, where merchants and planters who had observed piratical governance systems incorporated elements of democratic decision-making into their own institutions. The mythologization of pirate figures began almost immediately after their elimination, as colonial newspapers and pamphlets recounted the exploits of famous captains for audiences who were simultaneously fascinated and horrified by their criminal careers. The General History of the Pirates, published by Captain Charles Johnson in 1724, established many of the narrative conventions that would influence popular perceptions of piracy for centuries. Johnson's accounts, while based on contemporary sources, emphasized the dramatic and romantic aspects of piratical life, while minimizing the brutal realities of maritime crime. These early romanticizations served multiple functions within colonial society, providing entertainment for readers while reinforcing governmental messages about the ultimate futility of challenging legitimate authority. The stories typically concluded with the capture or death of pirate protagonists, demonstrating that criminal careers inevitably led to destruction, while celebrating the courage and determination of those who had chosen to live outside conventional social boundaries. This narrative framework allowed readers to vicariously experience the excitement of piratical adventures while affirming their commitment to law-abiding behaviour. The transformation of historical pirates into legendary figures accelerated as temporal distance increased and direct memories of piratical depredations faded from popular consciousness. Blackbeard, who had terrorised shipping and colonial settlements during his lifetime, became a figure of romantic adventure whose theatrical persona overshadowed his criminal activities. Similarly, other pirate captains were remembered more for their colourful personalities and dramatic exploits than for the economic damage they had inflicted on legitimate commerce and colonial development. The influence of pirate legends on literature and popular culture extended beyond simple entertainment to encompass broader questions about individual freedom, social justice, and the legitimacy of governmental authority. The democratic principles that had governed pirate communities provided alternative models of social organisation that appealed to readers who were dissatisfied with existing hierarchical structures. The image of pirates as rebels against oppressive authority resonated with colonial populations who were beginning to question their own relationships with metropolitan governments. The economic legacy of the golden age of piracy included both the immediate cost of suppression and the long-term benefits of improved maritime security. Colonial governments had invested enormous resources in anti-piracy campaigns, including the construction of fortifications, the maintenance of naval patrols, and the prosecution of captured criminals. However, these expenditures were ultimately justified by the restoration of secure shipping lanes and the resumption of normal commercial activities that generated increased tax revenues and economic growth. The development of more sophisticated governmental institutions in response to piratical challenges created administrative capabilities that served colonial societies well beyond the immediate need for piracy suppression. The admiralty courts that had been established to handle piracy cases provided colonial authorities with judicial institutions capable of addressing complex maritime legal questions. The intelligence networks that had been developed to track pirate movements created communication systems that facilitated governmental coordination and commercial planning throughout colonial territories. The international dimension of anti-piracy efforts had created diplomatic precedents that influenced European colonial relationships for generations. The recognition that certain threats transcended national boundaries and required cooperative responses provided models for addressing other challenges that affected multiple colonial empires. The legal frameworks that had been developed for prosecuting international criminals created foundations for later developments in international law and diplomatic cooperation. As the 1730s progressed, the memory of organised piracy began to fade from immediate consciousness, while its impact on colonial institutions and popular culture became increasingly apparent. The maritime world that had emerged from the anti-piracy campaigns was more secure, more regulated, and more closely integrated into global commercial networks than the chaotic environment that had preceded the golden age of piracy. The transformation of former pirate havens into legitimate colonial settlements demonstrated the capacity of governmental institutions to impose order on previously lawless territories while integrating criminal populations into productive colonial societies. The legacy of the golden age of piracy thus encompassed both practical changes in maritime law enforcement and romantic mythologies that would influence popular culture for centuries. The systematic campaigns that had eliminated organised piracy created more secure conditions for legitimate commerce, while establishing legal and administrative precedents that strengthened colonial governance. Simultaneously, the dramatic personalities and democratic ideals of pirate communities provided source material for legends that celebrated individual freedom and resistance to authority. This dual legacy reflected the complex nature of the piratical phenomenon itself, which had combined genuine threats to colonial security with alternative models of social organisation that challenged conventional hierarchies and offered glimpses of more egalitarian possibilities. The golden age of piracy had ended, but its influence on both practical governance and popular imagination would endure far beyond the deaths of the last pirate captains, shaping maritime law, colonial administration, and cultural mythology throughout the Atlantic world for generations to come.